The story of a young Italian college student named Giulia Cecchettin profoundly affected the entire country in the fall of 2023 due to its tragic and senseless nature. Giulia was known for her kindness and trust in others. She showed compassion to a young man who had strong feelings for her, fearing that if she rejected him, he might harm himself. Unfortunately, rather than hurting himself, he directed his pain toward others with devastating results. The full scope of the tragedy was later revealed through Giulia's personal journals, which documented her growing discomfort and emotional struggle. In the aftermath, the individual responsible for the tragedy tried to avoid responsibility by claiming that his actions were driven by overwhelming emotions and temporary confusion. However, the investigation consistently uncovered evidence suggesting that his actions were premeditated. Giulia Cecchettin was born on May 5, 2001, in Padua, Italy. She was the middle child in her family, with an older sister named Elena and a younger brother named Davide. Despite their different personalities, Elena being energetic and rebellious, while Giulia was quiet and obedient, the sisters were very close from an early age. Their family was middle class. Gino, Giulia's father, was an engineer at a local company. Her mother, Monica, worked in city administration. They lived in a spacious house and had several vehicles. Both parents were dedicated to their children. They working hard to provide everything they needed to become kind, responsible individuals. From a young age, Giulia was known for her kindness, empathy. She naturally connected with people, always striving to be helpful and considerate. At times, she was excessively gentle, often avoiding conflict even if it meant sacrificing her own interests. Giulia had a wide circle of friends, effortlessly fit in with any group. In school, she consistently achieved top grades, had a strong interest in literature and foreign languages. However, her true passion lay in art classes, where her teachers recognized her talent and encouraged her to pursue it further. As a teenager, Giulia attended an art academy while still in high school, seriously contemplating a career in the arts. However, as graduation neared, her parents urged her to opt for a more practical, stable career. Taking her father's advice, she enrolled at the University of Padua, one of Italy's leading public universities, chose to study biomedical engineering. Always one to avoid conflict, she agreed without protest and committed herself to her studies, even though she lacked genuine interest in the field. She did not envision a long-term career in biomedical engineering. While at university, Giulia met a classmate named Filippo Turetta, who was also in Padua. Filippo came from a humble background and was the only child of his parents, who cared for him deeply. Giulia and Filippo were in the same department. A mutual attraction quickly grew between them. Their relationship started with long conversations, emotional support, and facing challenges together. When Filippo began to struggle with his studies, Giulia helped him catch up and pass his exams. Soon after, he asked her out on their first date. They officially started dating in January 2022, which was Giulia's first serious relationship. Coming from a protected upbringing, she quickly became very infatuated with him. For the first 6 months, they were nearly inseparable, enjoying each other's company and appearing genuinely happy, which led their family and friends to believe in the strength of their bond. Just 2 months into their relationship, Filippo invited Giulia to dinner at his home, where he referred to her as his future wife while introducing her to his parents. A few weeks later, Giulia reciprocated by bringing Filippo to meet her family. Their friends were convinced that Giulia and Filippo would get engaged by the time they graduated. Life took a devastating turn for Giulia's family when her mother, Monica, was diagnosed with a late-stage illness, and the outlook was grim. Monica's health deteriorated quickly, and despite numerous consultations, doctors indicated there was little hope. The next 6 months felt like a waking nightmare for the Cecchettin family. During this challenging period, Filippo tried his best to provide support. He stayed close to Giulia and also spent time with Monica. Giulia truly valued his presence. She was thankful for his kindness and unwavering support. Nevertheless, even though Monica agreed to participate in experimental treatments, she sadly passed away in October 2022 at just 51 years old. Her death created a huge void in the family. For her husband, Gino, the grief was nearly unbearable. He felt emotionally overwhelmed. It was only through the love and support of his children that he found the strength to carry on. Although Filippo continued to be supportive, changes began occurring in Giulia's feelings toward him. Even though they were still together, she started to feel distant and uncertain about their future. She began to consider ending the relationship but was unsure how to address it without causing conflict or upsetting him. She confided in only her two closest friends, people she had known for years and trusted. They were shocked. On the surface, Giulia and Filippo appeared to be the perfect couple, with a happy, harmonious relationship. However, beneath that facade, things were unraveling. Giulia didn't provide specific details but communicated that the relationship had reached a breaking point and ending it seemed inevitable. She didn't want to hurt Filippo, but she could no longer continue living a lie. The true reason behind her decision would only be revealed much later, following her passing. At that time, Giulia was focused on preparing for her final thesis presentation. However, she realized that she didn't want to pursue a career in biomedical engineering. It simply didn't resonate with her. Without mentioning it to many people, she quietly applied to a prestigious international art school that specializes in comic illustration. When she finally confided in her father, she emphasized that she would complete her university degree as she had promised. She intended to graduate and obtain her qualifications as her parents expected, but after that, she wanted to pursue a second degree in something she was passionate about, becoming an illustrator. Gino listened intently and supported her decision. After the loss of his wife, he had a new outlook on life, recognized its brevity and fragility. He encouraged his daughter to follow her own path, make her own choices, and dedicate herself to what truly made her happy. Giulia's conversation with Filippo turned out to be much harder than she had expected. It took place in August 2023, after they had been together for over a year and a half. Giulia found it difficult to express herself, but Filippo seemed to handle the news maturely. He suggested they remain friends and stay in touch, recognizing the connection they had. Since they attended the same university and studied in the same department, they saw each other frequently. However, less than a week after their breakup, Filippo attempted to rekindle their relationship. He invited Giulia to one of their favorite restaurants, a place that once held special memories for them. He asked her to give their relationship another chance, reminding her of their good times together. Giulia, however, remained resolute. She did not want to repeat old mistakes. The evening ended quietly, but an unspoken tension lingered, only becoming stronger with time. Filippo's behavior took a troubling turn. He began contacting Giulia every day, initially expressing his love and pleading for them to get back together. However, this quickly shifted to manipulation and threats. He warned that he might harm himself if they didn't reconcile. Knowing Giulia's compassionate nature, he exploited her empathy, pushing her emotional buttons. Concerned for his well-being due to his unstable nature, Giulia reluctantly agreed to stay in touch. They briefly resumed seeing each other, driven more by worry than love. Giulia hoped this was only temporary and that their connection would eventually fade. However, Filippo's behavior became increasingly alarming. He flooded her with messages, some of which were distressing. In one, he ominously stated that they would either be together forever or their lives would both end. Although this was a clear threat, Giulia chose not to report it and only confided in her closest friend. This intense situation persisted for nearly 2 months. In late October 2023, Giulia realized she could no longer live in fear. She was set to present her thesis in medical engineering on November 16th, and her classes at the International School of Comics were starting in December. Her schedule was now fully packed, leaving no time for emotional drama or unhealthy attachments. Although still anxious about how Filippo would react, she decided to invite him to a quiet cafe they used to visit. She carefully chose her words to avoid any conflict, explaining that they could remain friends but nothing more. Despite her attempt to be respectful, Filippo was deeply disturbed by her decision. He took the news hard, began to call and message her frequently, but Giulia, busy with her thesis, limited him responses to brief notes. It was around this time that Filippo started secretly following her. He soon noticed she was spending time with someone new guy. Their friendship appeared warm and affectionate, suggesting they might become a couple. Filippo struggled to accept this, and a darker plan began to take shape in his mind. On Saturday, November 11, 2023, Giulia dedicated most of her day to her graduation project. At around 5 p.m., she sent the final version to her academic advisor. Earlier that day, about an hour before, her ex-boyfriend Filippo called her, asking if she would join him to shop for shoes for their upcoming graduation ceremony. It was unusual for him to reach out, as he hadn't contacted her at all for about a week. No texts, calls, or visits. Giulia thought that he had finally accepted their breakup and moved on. Wanting to remain on good terms, she agreed to help him with the shopping. They planned for him to pick her up at 6 p.m. Giulia informed her father that she would be home before midnight and hugged him tightly as she left, unaware that it would be the last time he would see her alive. Filippo arrived at the Sacchetin house right on time. Giulia got into the passenger seat, and they drove to the shopping center in Margra. Witnesses later reported seeing them calmly browsing the stores together. They bought a pair of shoes. Chiaretta and Giulia also had dinner together at a McDonald's inside the mall at around 9:02 p.m., with Giulia paying for both meals with her credit card. They then left the building at around 10:30 p.m. At 10:43 p.m., Giulia sent her final message via WhatsApp to her sister Elena, who was in Vienna at the time for college. However, at 10:45 p.m., her messages suddenly stopped, and she never replied again. Shortly after, her phone was turned off. When Giulia didn't come home by midnight, her family started to worry. At first, they tried to remain calm, thinking she might have just lost track of time. However, by 1 a.m., they began to sense that something was very wrong. Giulia never stayed out overnight without letting someone know. Her phone was off, and they couldn't reach Filippo. Her father and older sister went to file a missing person report while her younger brother stayed home in case Giulia returned. They still held on to a small hope that her phone had died or that she had been delayed, but they believed she would have found a way to let them know she was okay. Police were doubtful about the situation. They pointed out that as an adult, Giulia had the right to choose not to return home or inform anyone of her location. Only a few hours had passed since she was last seen, and according to standard procedure, search efforts for missing adults usually do not start until 24 hours after they go missing. What no one knew at that moment was that about 4 hours before her family reported her missing, an alarming incident had already occurred. This detail was initially overlooked in relation to Giulia's disappearance, but it would soon become evident that it was significant. At around 11:15 p.m. on the night Giulia disappeared, local police received a call from a man. While on his balcony smoking a cigarette, he witnessed something alarming. His apartment overlooked a small parking lot across the street, where he heard someone screaming for help. When he looked more closely, he saw a young woman, clearly terrified, escape from a parked car. Moments later, a man exited the same car, chased her down, and forced her back inside while appearing to hit her. He then pushed her into the back seat and quickly drove off, speeding into the night. The witness tried to remember the license plate number, but couldn't see it clearly in the dark and from a distance. He did remember that the car was a black compact vehicle, possibly a Fiat Punto. He quickly called the local authorities to report what he had witnessed, but since he didn't have many identifying details, they had little to work with. Initially, the authorities dismissed his call because they didn't see it as an immediate threat and chose not to respond. However, the man couldn't shake the feeling that what he had seen was more serious than they realized. Believing he had witnessed a crime, he decided to go to the police station in person. At the station, he met a man named Gino, who was there to report his daughter, Giulia, missing. To their surprise, they discovered they lived only a few houses apart. The man's building was near the end of the street, right across from a small parking lot where the unsettling scene had occurred. The black compact car he described looked a lot like the one driven by Filippo. That same evening, Filippo had picked up his former girlfriend in his black Fiat Punto before they went to the shopping center. Investigators reached out to Filippo's parents, who were understandably anxious. They had been calling friends in hopes of hearing from their son, but unfortunately, no one could provide any helpful information to the police. Officers were quickly sent to the parking lot, which was now thought to be the location of a violent incident. To their disappointment, there were no security cameras in the area. However, security video footage from a factory in the nearby town of Fosso shows Filippo brutally beating Giulia. When she tried to escape, Filippo hit her again from behind, then stuffed her bleeding body into the trunk of his black Fiat Punto. When arriving at the scene of the attack, what they uncovered was alarming. On the ground was a large knife, its blade broken near the handle. Nearby were several dark reddish stains. Although the blood wasn't excessive, it indicated that someone had been injured. Forensic experts confirmed that the knife bore Filippo's fingerprints, the blood matched Giulia's DNA. The broken blade and a deep gouge in the pavement. Investigators feared the worst but still hoped that Giulia might be alive and urgently in need of help. Both students' phones had been turned off shortly after the incident. Data indicated that their last known location was that parking lot where the suspected assault and abduction occurred. Law enforcement opened a criminal case against Filippo, charging him with assault and unlawful detention, based on the evidence collected. His parents were shocked and firmly believed that their son would never hurt Giulia, claiming he loved her deeply. Detectives started tracking Filippo's movements by examining footage from roadside surveillance cameras. Later that night, a black Fiat Punto was spotted heading towards a lake in the Porton province. The next day, the vehicle was seen in multiple areas. On November 12, a young man who matched Filippo's description bought something at a gas station near the Austrian border. He used a €20 bill that had what looked like dried blood on it. The cashier didn't pay much attention to this detail at the time, but later surveillance footage confirmed that the buyer was indeed Filippo. A disturbing piece of evidence surfaced shortly after. Security video footage from a factory in the nearby town of Fosso shows Filippo brutally beating Giulia. After the assault, he stood over her lifeless body for several minutes before putting her in the trunk of a car. Investigators found pools of blood and clear signs of a struggle at the scene, leaving no doubt that Giulia had likely been killed. However, her remains were still missing, and the suspect's whereabouts were unknown. Filippo was officially declared wanted throughout Europe. Giulia's body was discovered near Lake Barsis in Piancavallo on November 18, 2023 by the Special Dogs Unit of the Civil Protection. The body was found inside a large nylon bag in a cave at 50 meters altitude, within a wooded area that is generally closed during the autumn-winter period for security reasons. The Italian Forensic Services performed an autopsy on December 1, 2023, and reported that Giulia's body had over 20 stab wounds. She had blunt force trauma to her head, and there were clear signs of her wrists being restrained. Additionally, adhesive residue on her face indicated that her mouth had been taped shut. The circumstances of this case suggested a personal motive and an unusual amount of anger. Filippo was found on November 19 in an emergency lane of a motorway near Leipzig, after his car had run out of petrol. Authorities arrested him and sent him back to Italy, where the case had caused a national uproar. During his initial questioning, Filippo confessed in detail about the events, but he stated that he was emotionally disoriented at the time and couldn't recall some parts of what happened. He recounted that they had spent a pleasant day shopping at the mall. On their way back, they stopped in a parking lot near Giulia's house. Filippo gave her a stuffed animal as a gift and asked if they could start their relationship over. Giulia reportedly raised her voice, rejected the gift, and got out of the car, which he claimed triggered a sudden outburst of anger. He grabbed a knife and chased after Giulia, injuring her shoulder in the process. She fell to the ground, and when he tried to strike her again, he missed, causing his knife to break when it hit the pavement. Filippo claimed he forced her back into the car, tied her wrists with rope, and covered her mouth with tape before driving around without a specific destination. Eventually, they ended up in an industrial area. According to him, Giulia managed to open the door and escape. He then took out a second knife and pursued her, continuing to attack until she stopped moving. When asked how many times he hit her, Filippo estimated maybe 5 or 7. However, the forensic team found over 20 wounds, and his story of an unplanned outburst was contradicted by the fact that he had arrived at the meeting with 2 knives, rope, tape, and plastic bags, indicating he was prepared. Filippo claimed he planned to take his own life afterward in order to be with Giulia. He even revealed shallow cuts on his wrists, although he confessed he didn't go through with it. He found it easier to end another's life than to end his own. Despite strong evidence implicating him, his family's legal team maintained that he was mentally confused and had memory loss. Their entire defense strategy focused on this idea, aiming for a lighter sentence or a transfer to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. Giulia's father, in his grief, took a remarkable action. He gave investigators pages from her personal diary and later made some of them public. His goal was to reveal the truth and draw attention to what his daughter had experienced. The diary entries clearly explained why Giulia had decided to end her relationship with Filippo and what was happening out of public view. Although she had loved him, Filippo had become controlling, emotionally manipulative. He monitored her whereabouts, kept track of her phone and social media, forbade her from seeing friends, and expected her to obey his demands at all times. A significant conflict occurred just before the tragedy involving Filippo's insistence on attending a small family birthday party for Giulia's sister, Elena. This event took place shortly after their mother had passed away, and Giulia's family was not in the mood to celebrate. Despite this, Filippo was angry, feeling that he was part of the family and had the right to attend all family gatherings. This disagreement made Giulia reconsider their relationship, and she recognized that she needed to end things for good. However, Filippo began to use emotional manipulation, threatening to harm himself if she left him. Giulia, being compassionate and empathetic, felt guilty about this. Unfortunately, her kindness would eventually lead to devastating consequences. On September 23, 2024, the summary trial of Filippo Turetta began at the Venice court. He is charged with intentional homicide, aggravated by malice, cruelty, brutality, stalking, and improper disposal of a corpse. By the start of the trial, new evidence indicated that the crime had been premeditated. Investigators discovered that Filippo had begun planning the attack about a week prior, conducting extensive online research for isolated locations in the suburbs that he could use to carry out the act and conceal the aftermath. His browsing history confirmed this. During a search of his car, officers found a printed map of the area. Initially, its relevance was unclear, but it later became evident that Filippo had chosen to use a physical map instead of GPS to avoid leaving a digital footprint. He meticulously planned every detail, but he seemed uncertain about what to do afterward. There were weak indications that he might have considered self-harm, but this was not convincing. By the time of his trial, it was clear that Filippo had acted with intent. He abandoned the emotional disorientation defense and made no claims of psychological instability, admitting that his actions were intentional. As expected, Turetta was questioned at the hearing on October 25, where he presented a 40-page memorial in which he detailed his actions. This prompted the court to cancel the hearing scheduled for October 28, as sufficient questioning had already taken place. At the hearing on November 25, 2024, the prosecutor requested a life sentence for Filippo Turetta. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on December 3, 2024, concluding the trial at the first instance. Aggravating circumstances of premeditated murder, kidnapping, and concealment of the body were acknowledged, while charges of stalking and cruelty were dismissed. In addition, Filippo must pay €760,000 in compensation to the Cecchettin family. In his final statement to the court, Filippo stated he would not appeal the verdict, acknowledging it as fair and expressing no intention to contest the outcome. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Cassidy Goodson. Cassidy Goodson's early years were spent in a loving family in a quiet area of the small town of Lakeland, Florida, USA, which has a population of about 100,000 people. Those who knew her described her as a girl with great potential who was outgoing and successful in softball. Both of her parents worked hard for the good of the family, their first priority was always to provide for their children. Cassidy had a sister and a brother, with whom she had quite close relationships. In her teens, Cassidy had no problems with her parents or the law. She did not use illegal substances, did not smoke, was athletic, and excelled academically. Cassidy helped her mother with housework, and every Sunday, she went with her family to church. Everyone who knew she believed that she had a great future. She was eager to study and planned to pursue a career. However, in the spring of 2012, significant changes occurred in the life of the 14-year-old teenager. Her brother and sister noticed that Cassidy began to behave differently than usual. First of all, she gained weight. However, her mother believed that this could be associated with hormonal changes during adolescence. The girl's clothing preferences changed as well. It seemed that Cassidy was very self-conscious about what was happening, so she began to wear baggy clothes that hid her figure. Cassidy did not even change clothes with her classmates before physical education. Against this backdrop, some people quickly began to suspect that she was pregnant, and rumors about this started to circulate at school. She did not admit it to her sister or best friends. In fact, she found herself in a delicate situation. She was afraid of her family's reaction. She felt great anxiety and decided to hide her pregnancy from her parents, as well as from everyone around her. Gradually, her belly began to grow. Cassidy gained weight but continued to stubbornly wear the same pants to avoid detection. Around the house, she wrapped herself in a blanket. The once smiling and sociable schoolgirl now spent most of her time alone in her room, hardly communicating with anyone. She stopped going to church to avoid catching the eye of acquaintances. Cassidy's sister, as well as her mother, Teresa, noticed strange changes in her behavior. Teresa tried to discuss the possibility of pregnancy with her daughter. Cassidy immediately rejected such assumptions. Her mother insisted that she take a pregnancy test to eliminate any doubts, but deep down, she did not think that Cassidy could keep something like this a secret. Teresa bought several tests, and Cassidy agreed to take them. Teresa trusted her daughter, so she did not attend the test with her. This proved to be very convenient for Cassidy, as she easily managed to deceive everyone, proving that she was not pregnant. Teresa's trust became a fatal mistake. She talked to her daughter about this topic, but Cassidy insisted that she did not need lectures on contraception because she was not intimate active and did not date boys. Teresa believed in her once again, continuing to wash her daughter's clothes every week and monitor her menstrual cycle. Around the same time, even the father began to notice Cassidy's uncharacteristic behavior. One day, when he saw her walking around the house wrapped in a blanket, he also had doubts. He tried to talk to her, as did the rest of the family, but Cassidy rejected any questions or suspicions. Her brother and sister also suspected something was wrong, particularly after the rumors that had spread around the school. They doubted that Cassidy had taken the pregnancy test honestly and even discussed their alarming assumptions with other family members. All of this reached their grandparents, but they too failed to get through to Cassidy, who continued to tell them that she had simply gained weight due to the transition period and now had a lot of complexes because of it. They believed her. By the middle of the summer, her belly had become so large that it was impossible to hide it with baggy clothes. She walked around wrapped in a blanket almost all day, but continued to insist that she was not pregnant. Cassidy ignored her loved ones and could even be rude in her responses. Realizing that it was impossible to get through to their daughter, her parents simply calmed down and continued to lead their usual lives. Of course, it is impossible to hide something like this forever, as the due date was approaching, and it all could turn into a terrible tragedy. On September 19, 2012, Teresa entered the bathroom after Cassidy had spent a long time in the shower. She noticed blood on the toilet and on the floor next to it. Alarmed, Teresa immediately suspected something was wrong and went to her daughter's room. There, she found Cassidy, who seemed exhausted. She was pale and looked sickly, but still refused to explain what was happening. Cassidy tried to act as if everything was fine. However, after discovering the blood, her mother insisted on taking her to the medical center's emergency room, where the doctors examined her daughter for a possible miscarriage. Cassidy eventually confessed to the doctors. After the examination, it was futile to deny it, so she admitted that she had indeed had a miscarriage. According to Cassidy, while she was sitting on the toilet, the fetus unexpectedly fell out, and she didn't have time to process what was happening. Allegedly, Cassidy accidentally washed the fetus away and only realized the gravity of the situation afterward. She was scared and didn't tell her mother about it. Cassidy received the necessary medical assistance, her wounds were treated, and she was sent home to recover. When Cassidy and her mother returned home, both tried not to talk about what had happened. Teresa provided her daughter with comprehensive support. On September 22, 2012, Teresa noticed a suspicious and unpleasant smell in Cassidy's room. Since Cassidy was not there, Teresa decided to do some cleaning, thinking her daughter had merely forgotten to throw out some food. Of course, she was curious about the source of the unpleasant odor and wanted to eliminate it. While sorting through dirty laundry, it quickly became apparent that the same unpleasant smell emanated from it. Digging to the bottom, she found a box containing a plastic bag. When she opened it, she found the lifeless body of a baby. Horrified, Teresa went to the police, reporting what had transpired. That same evening, law enforcement officers arrived at the Goodson house and took them to the station for questioning. Cassidy, without much resistance, admitted that there had been no miscarriage. She had simply given birth and hidden the baby's body from everyone. According to Cassidy's confession, on that fateful day, her water broke, but she managed to conceal it by soaking her bed linens. She then went to the bathroom, where she pretended to take a shower to disguise her actions. She bit down on a towel to endure the pain and stifle her cries while giving birth on the toilet, using scissors to remove the baby from herself. Once it was over, she used another towel to clean the bathroom of blood. Exhausted, she felt the baby breathing. Terrified of being exposed, she decided to get rid of him. Cassidy strangled her child, hid his body in a plastic bag, which she placed in a shoebox and concealed in her room. Remarkably, Cassidy managed to perform all these actions quickly and without being noticed by the rest of her family, who were at home at the time. The detective wanted to classify the crime properly, so they were interested in the details. Initially, Cassidy was uncooperative but eventually agreed to tell them everything, reconstructing the events on camera. She was given a doll resembling Santa Claus and demonstrated her actions, indicating what she had done. After the baby was in her arms, he did not open his eyes, leading her to realize with horror that she had grabbed the newborn by the throat and squeezed it with all her might. She believed the baby would not survive. The murder occurred while the child was still connected to her by the umbilical cord. Afterward, she cut it, washed everything, and wrapped the baby's body in a plastic bag before hiding it in the laundry container. Cassidy had not discarded the box with the body simply because she did not know how to dispose of it correctly. Only an autopsy could confirm or refute her words. The forensic expert determined that the baby had been born healthy and full term, weighing 9.5 pounds. So, the claim that the baby was born prematurely was impossible to uphold. The baby could have survived if not for the barbaric actions of his mother. The autopsy confirmed that the child died due to suffocation. Additionally, he had multiple injuries, including a head injury from blunt force trauma, likely from a fall after birth. However, this injury could not have been fatal. The most alarming injuries were the lacerations on the small body inflicted by the scissors, which had been used as a surgical instrument to extract the child from her. The detectives were puzzled as to why she left the baby's body in her room, as it seemed Cassidy did not even intend to dispose of it. The unbearable smell in the room ultimately exposed her. Psychologists suggested that this could be a form of remorse. Perhaps Cassidy wanted to be caught to receive what she believed was deserved punishment. Interestingly, Cassidy continued to remain silent about the identity of the baby's father. Detectives speculated whether her pregnancy could have resulted from another crime, such as violence against a minor. But Cassidy only stated that she was trying to hide the pregnancy from her family out of fear that it would harm her relationships with her parents, whom she did not want to disappoint. She intended to give birth and get rid of the baby from the beginning, indicating that her actions were premeditated. After these revelations, Cassidy was arrested and taken to a correctional facility for juvenile offenders in the county. After assessing the nature of the crime, she was charged with premeditated murder. In addition, the question arose about bringing charges of child abuse under aggravating circumstances, also of the first degree. The police believed that her horrific act was enough to try the offender as an adult in order to seek a harsher sentence. They knew her as a smart girl who was never prone to violence. Her parents insisted she was simply too immature to properly evaluate her horrific actions. Under the Florida criminal justice system for adults, the maximum penalty for first-degree murder is life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, due to Cassidy's age, she could not be sentenced to death. Additionally, earlier that same year, a ruling was issued by the U.S. Supreme Court declaring mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for juvenile prisoners unconstitutional. Cassidy's lawyer faced a difficult fight, not only with the system but also with outraged local residents who learned all the details of the crime and demanded the harshest punishment. Cassidy's parents found a good lawyer who managed to negotiate a plea bargain for manslaughter. The hearings were very emotional. The Goodson family supported Cassidy, and everyone cried, realizing that this murder could ruin many lives. Teresa was brought in for questioning before the trial began. Teresa denied knowing about the pregnancy and detailed how she had initially suspected her daughter was pregnant, but had taken her word for it after the pregnancy tests. She believed that her daughter was simply gaining weight, which could easily be explained by hormonal changes during adolescence. She insisted that if she had known about her daughter's delicate situation, she would have never allowed what happened. She would have supported her daughter and helped Cassidy with childbirth. Later, none of Cassidy's relatives were held accountable. In a video shown to the jury, Cassidy has been reproduced how she killed her newborn son. She repeated that as soon as he was born, she hoped that he was not breathing, but after touching him, she realized that this was not the case, he was alive and breathing. Cassidy then squeezed the baby's neck with her hands, simply to make him stop breathing so that she would not have any problems. It took her about a minute to kill the boy. At the sentencing, the judge emphasized that Cassidy had never previously encountered problems with the law and that the probability of her posing a threat to society was considered minimal. In his opinion, Cassidy was simply immature for such a responsible step as motherhood. However, she was old enough to be punished for her cruel act. During the sentencing, the judge expressed hope that she would not be in the dock for another crime. The prosecutor and the lawyer agreed that Cassidy deserved a second chance, and it was decided to send her to a special program at the Hillsborough Academy for Girls. As she left the courtroom, Cassidy wiped away tears with the sleeve of her prison uniform. A few months later, Cassidy had to appear in court again for the commission to decide her future. She was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison, with the stipulation that if she again went down a slippery path of crime, she would not receive another chance for rehabilitation. After her release, she would be under close supervision and must follow the rules. Upon the slightest violation, Cassidy could end up behind bars again, as an adult. Special attention was paid to the investigation of the child's paternity. Detectives were able to establish that it was another minor who did not even know about the pregnancy. The relationship between Cassidy and the boy had ended before the pregnancy. The specific name of the young man was never revealed, so that no one else would be implicated in this high-profile case, which had caused wide public resonance and uproar. Protracted disputes and debates were just beginning, as this case raised the whole country on its feet. All local and national media seemed to want to comment on the incident. In particular, one of the studies detailed numerous incidents similar to the Cassidy Goodson case, identifying a common pattern: girls are most afraid of hiding their pregnancies from their mothers. It is noteworthy that many of these crimes are committed by unmarried girls who fear being judged by their parents. However, not everyone agreed with this theory. Some studies conducted by other experts indicated that fathers tend to be stricter in such matters. In any case, this raised the sensitive issue of the Goodson family's involvement and the contribution they made to the boy's death. Cassidy maintained she was compelled to hide her situation from her relatives, fearing relationship deterioration. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, she continued to insist on her version of events and openly lied. For many, this issue was particularly acute, especially after the events that unfolded. Experts in psychiatry had split into two camps. Some supported Cassidy and considered her family indirectly involved, while others solely blamed her for the crime. All of this sparked numerous debates, with research results being scrutinized and analyzed. For example, another expert study showed that 7 out of 9 girls who committed such crimes were their father's favorites or had grown up without a mother. Despite their lack of mental health issues in everyday life, they portrayed simplified roles that created a dangerous mix. This mix led to significant adjustments in their behavior and ultimately resulted in the murder of newborns. At the same time, these girls were often successful in their studies, participated in sports, and were popular in school, similar to Cassidy. This mix of roles caused a kind of guilt for being close to someone, which could distort their perception, making their own baby seem alien or harmful, something to be gotten rid of. Often, such teenagers hope of stillbirth, as it appears to be the easiest way to avoid responsibility. After that, they can dispose of the child without guilt and leave. All of this can be exacerbated by isolation from loved ones, as was observed in Cassidy's case. Refusing to discuss her problems with her family, she drove herself into a corner. Cassidy's actions sparked controversy, including debates about the topic of terminating pregnancies. It seemed that this would be an obvious solution to her problem. However, judging from the social media reactions and media coverage of the Cassidy Goodson story was used as an argument in favor of allowing abortions at such a young age. Many wondered why the burden of making such heavy decisions was entirely placed on an underage schoolgirl. Cassidy's parents' attempts to understand what was happening, they remained convinced that they had done absolutely nothing wrong. Questions arose about how one could not notice their daughter's growing belly and strange behavior. Why did they so easily and simplistically ignore the growth of her belly? Relatives noted that her behavior became increasingly uncharacteristic for her. Usually, close relatives notice such changes, but in her case, it seemed as if everyone was indifferent to her fate. They were surprised that it took finding blood in the bathroom for her mother to understand what was happening. Why, before this event, did no one take Cassidy to a medical center? Some people attempted to shift the blame for the crime from Cassidy to her parents, believing that she simply did not receive enough attention from her loved ones. This, too, could have concealed the real reason for her desire to keep the pregnancy secret. People were divided on these issues, with many disturbed by the fact that scissors were used. According to doctors, Cassidy used them to cut herself, severing the umbilical cord of a still, living child. To quickly pull out the baby, she used an ordinary office tool as a surgical instrument. Naturally, Cassidy experienced severe pain, but to cope with it, she clenched a piece of towel in her teeth. It was unclear what led to this mental or emotional state, whether it was her own horror or fear of what her parents might do. She was terrified of enduring any punishment just to prevent her mother and father from discovering what was happening. This raised reasonable concerns about what was really occurring within the walls of her home, leading detectives to conduct a thorough investigation. However, suspicions of cruel treatment from the parents' side could not be confirmed, as no bruises or signs of abuse were found on Cassidy's body. The other children in the family denied any physical abuse from their mother and father. After a year and a half in a correctional facility for girls, Cassidy was released. She successfully completed a rehabilitation program for juvenile offenders, and it was noted that she was not aggressive. The risk of reoffending was considered minimal. Cassidy desperately resisted reintegrating into society, having lost all her friends, received threats, and feared going outside. She often admitted that she felt hated and even persecuted. Cassidy realized she was living in hell, and it was unclear when this would end. She returned to her bedroom, which her parents had left untouched since her arrest. Everything remained in its usual place, even the lotion she had used at the age of 14. The hardest part was looking into the eyes of her loved ones, who wanted to help her. Despite the traumatic events and the heinous act she committed, Cassidy did not abandon her desire to become a mother. In 2017, she married and gave birth to her first daughter, followed by her second daughter, 2 years later. After the birth of her second girl, she posted on her social media that she longed to have a boy. These events were not just happy moments in her life but also demonstrated Cassidy's determination to fight. She expressed online that people around her seemed to wish she wouldn't have children at all. When asked why, Cassidy responded with a smile, indicating that people could not forgive her for killing a baby and that she had many haters. Many wrote that they wanted Cassidy to remain behind bars for the rest of her life, unwilling to live next to a child killer. On her social media, Cassidy posted numerous photos portraying herself as a loving mother, a young woman trying to build her happiness and family. It seemed that with age, as she began to understand the full gravity of her crime, she struggled to forgive herself for the fact that her first child died. In fact, the boy did not even have a name. Cassidy didn't consider what to call him. Therefore, in the case of the murder of a newborn, he was simply referred to as Baby Goodson. All these years, Cassidy remained under close scrutiny from not only the authorities but also the public. Even after so long, people remained indignant about the fate of the boy strangled in the first minutes of life. In her posts, Cassidy often hinted at external pressure. In 2020, she made a post indicating that she was being subjected to constant harassment that she could no longer tolerate. Cassidy created a new account and began sharing her photos again. She studied to be a nurse at Madison College. It appears that the judge may have been mistaken in thinking that she had corrected her ways. Since 2021, she began to face legal troubles again and ended up in prison, just like her husband. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shirley and Duguay. Choosing a soulmate is a very important step because this person can become the love of your life or a real nightmare. Shirley and Duguay was born on October 11, 1962. She was a native of Prince Edward Island, born and raised in the smallest of the Canadian provinces. Regarding her early years, she grew up in a close, knit family with two sisters. They had a loving father who supported them and was family-oriented, a value he passed on to his daughters. By 1994, Shirley was a 32-year-old mother of 5 children, 2 of whom were from previous relationships. However, she was going through a serious crisis with her husband, Douglas Beamish, with whom she had been in a relationship for several years. Shirley worked hard and devoted the rest of her time to her children. This was very helpful to her. She never lost faith in herself or people and maintained a positive attitude, constantly communicating with relatives and friends who supported her in every possible way. She truly needed that support as she barely managed to finalize her divorce proceedings with Doug. A dispute over custody of the children arose during their relationship, which had become increasingly oppressive. Shirley repeatedly complained that she was a victim of domestic violence. People in her close circle often saw traces of beatings on her. Despite the cruelty of the relationship, she rejected any proposals to separate, believing that her husband would simply kill her if she tried to leave. Even when Shirley reached a boiling point, her husband managed to keep her from getting a divorce. She was financially dependent on him, emotionally depressed, and simply afraid she would not be able to cope with the children without his support. Unfortunately, as they aged, his aggression began to shift toward the younger generation. At this point, Shirley sought support from the state to combat domestic violence. The Canadian justice system treated problems within the family with much less attention than the situation required. Despite numerous threats, statements, and evidence of aggression, Shirley failed to achieve any prohibitions or restrictions against Douglas. Finally gathering her strength, Shirley filed for divorce and moved out with the children. Now, the most pressing issue was the division of custody rights. During this period, she had 5 children aged 8 to 15. She feared for their health and safety given her husband's behavior. As a result, she sought sole custody of her 3 youngest children, fearing that Douglas would take revenge and shift his anger onto them. She intended to limit his opportunities for supervised visitations to no more than once a week. Additionally, she was counting on alimony because raising 5 children alone would be too challenging. Though she was already receiving small payments for 2 children from a previous relationship, it was not enough. Shirley's intentions only fueled Doug's anger. By the fall of 1994, she repeatedly expressed fears for her life. Yet, despite everything, she continued to hope for the best and led a normal life. On October 7, 1994, a woman found an abandoned car on Highway 169, near Tyne Valley in rural Prince Edward Island. She couldn't specify how long it had been there since she had been away from home for several days. Upon her return, she immediately noticed a car parked oddly in the middle of a field. When she approached to offer help to the driver, her worry grew. The car had no license plates, and on the windshield, there were numerous small splashes resembling blood. There was no one near the car, so she quickly contacted the police. Upon receipt of report, the law enforcement officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that something terrible had possibly happened in the car. Inside, they found many bloodstains but no signs of a struggle or dragging nearby, suggesting it had been abandoned far from where a confrontation had taken place. Investigators wondered if the victim of such an attack could have survived. Due to the lack of license plates, identifying the car took longer. Eventually, detectives discovered it belonged to 32-year-old Shirley and Duguay. They tried to contact her, but to no avail, as her address was not known. They could only find her father and children. As it turned out, none of her relatives or friends had heard anything about her despite several police calls. Shirley had stopped responding to calls 4 days before the witness reported the abandoned car, approximately on October 3rd. It was normal for her to leave periodically for work, so during that entire time, no one suspected anything was wrong. No one could find the mother of the children, leading the police to begin a search operation, considering Shirley might be in danger. Given the amount of blood in the cabin, it was evident that the attack had been committed with great cruelty. This was also indicated by the nature of the splashes, which were analyzed by experts. Blood doesn't randomly splatter all over a cabin from random blows, it suggested a prolonged beating. Such behavior was atypical for either robbery or abuse, as typically, brutal criminals are well acquainted with their victims. Naturally, the immediate environment of Shirley was inspected, and everyone who knew Shirley pointed to her ex-husband, Doug. There were no other suspects, only he had issues with her. This man constantly beat her and threatened her. Investigators decided to interview Doug. He confirmed that he had a tense relationship with his wife but blamed her difficult character. He denied any accusations of domestic violence and cruelty on his part, accusing his wife of wanting to spite him after the divorce. Given the capabilities of forensic science in 1994, it was not possible to quickly determine the source of the blood found in the car. Doug behaved calmly, and there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Despite numerous witnesses believing him guilty, this was deemed insufficient. The main problem was the absence of a body. It remained unclear what happened to Shirley, so she was still considered missing. Days, weeks, and months passed. It became obvious to everyone that she was likely not alive, but the only suspect persisted. Authorities combed a vast area with a radius of tens of kilometers around where they found the abandoned car. The squad did manage to find valuable evidence, but no direct indications of Doug's involvement. Detectives interrogated him repeatedly again, but to no avail. When they compared the blood found in the car with samples from Shirley's relatives, they confirmed that the profiles matched, which meant the victim of the beating in the car, as expected, was Shirley. Interestingly, in addition to Shirley's blood, traces belonging to someone else were found inside the car. Analysis compared to Doug's blood showed that the additional blood belonged to him. However, without a body, even this evidence did not establish a direct link to the crime or elicit a confession from him. He insisted that the car was his, as Shirley had used it during their 15-year relationship, and he could have repeatedly injured himself inside it. It was impossible to calculate the exact time of his bloodstains' appearance. All of this caused bewilderment and discontent among the relatives of Shirley. The local community was also outraged because a dangerous person was walking free. Many believed in Doug's guilt. The Duguay family insisted that he was the only one capable of such cruelty. In the car, there were numerous splatters of blood, and experts indicated they resulted from medium force blows. However, the police were not sure if the criminal had used a weapon. The cushion on Shirley's seat was soaked in blood. She had used it to sit while driving. Being a petite woman, about 150 centimeters tall and weighing around 45 kilograms, she needed the cushion to control the vehicle effectively. The cushion had blood from 2 different sources mixed. About 1 kilometer from the abandoned car, they discovered a shovel with traces of blood and 2 black hairs. This evidence became the first valuable clue examined by forensic scientists in the laboratory. Microscopic analysis and comparison with the hairs found on Shirley confirmed they belonged to her. By this time, the search operation had been underway for more than a month. The most significant find was a thick plastic bag containing a pair of sports shoes and a leather jacket, both covered in blood. The items were located 2.5 kilometers from Shirley's car. The blood stain analysis confirmed they belonged to Shirley. However, the shoes and jacket were clearly not her size, were more consistent with a man's. When questioned about the sneakers and jacket, Douglas denied ever having worn anything like that. Unfortunately, there was once again no confirmation of this, as his blood was not found on the jacket or shoes. Detectives noticed that the sizes matched, but this was not enough to bring charges. The list of evidence included significant circumstantial evidence. It turned out to be a tough nut to crack, so more information was needed. The found shoes were sent to shoe expert Key Beadle. He knew well that each person wears shoes in their own way. Differences in shape, size, and structure of feet result in unique features in mechanics. Each person's gait is as unique as their fingerprints. If the shoes had been worn for a long time, this would affect the geometry and wear characteristics. Dr. Key began studying the marks left on the insole and the inner surface of the sole. As part of the investigation, a warrant was obtained to create casts of Douglas's feet. This became an important stage in the process. In parallel, the expert analyzed the condition of the insoles and soles of the discovered shoes, revealing that the criminal had a deformed big toe. A small, twisted print suggested that Doug had used them. Nevertheless, Doug continued to deny his involvement. Forensic experts placed great hopes on analyzing the jacket, which had peculiar fibers, including 20 thin white hairs. With this exception, no other evidence remained on the clothing. The forensic experts examined the fibers under a microscope and found that they resembled animal hair rather than human hair. The detectives were busy with the investigation, and one of them recalled an important detail. When he first came to speak with Doug at his home, he saw a white cat named Snowball. By connecting the owner of the jacket to the animal, they could potentially establish who owned the item of clothing. The police became convinced that these lint particles were left by the criminal's cat, which led to the key question of how to prove the criminal's guilt through his pet. The search began for an expert who dealt with such matters. Detectives made hundreds of phone calls and were amazed to find that such studies had not yet been explored in the history of criminology and forensic science. The closest researchers were pet experts studying their genes to combat diseases. Dr. Stephen O'Brien, a geneticist from the National Institute in the USA, spent decades studying hereditary diseases in cats, including cancer. He knew more about pet genetics than anyone else in the world. However, even he did not promise much. Comparing the DNA profile of Snowball with detected fibers was a unique task. First, it was necessary to obtain a blood sample from the cat, but the owner of the pet was not inclined to cooperate with the police. A significant amount of time was spent just catching the cat on the street and getting a blood sample. Finally, Dr. O'Brien received samples of Snowball's materials, including fur, which were transported almost under escort. Fortunately, many of these hair follicles were preserved, providing enough for a DNA profile comparison. Dr. O'Brien confirmed that the fibers belonged to the same animal. However, a new question arose. Prince Edward Island was nearly isolated, and the doctor had serious suspicions that many domestic cats lived there, which could mean they were all related. If this was indeed the case, then comparing DNA profiles could show a match with any 2 animals in the province, calling into question all the work done. The police were not planning to give up, so they decided to gather at least 24 blood samples from cats in the area, which would later be delivered to Dr. O'Brien's laboratory for analysis and comparison. This process took even more time, during which the dangerous criminal was still at large. When the report was finally ready, Dr. O'Brien confirmed that there was great genetic diversity among the cats on Prince Edward Island. Not a single pair of the 20 samples collected matched. This led to the conclusion that, apart from Snowball, only one of the 70 million cats could have owned this fur, which became a turning point that confirmed the white fur of the jacket belonged to Douglas's cat. Despite this evidence, Douglas continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the jacket and claimed he had no idea where his ex-wife was. More than 6 months passed, but the body of Shirley was still not found. 7 months after the disappearance of Shirley, a random fisherman was sailing along the river in Enmore. He noticed something suspicious in the bushes along the shore but could not see it clearly. So, he decided to swim closer. From a distance of several meters, he realized that the remains definitely belonged to a person, but the stature was so small that the fisherman initially thought it was a child. They was far from the city, so he thought that wild animals might have dragged someone's body away. He covered the remains with his raincoat and went towards the city to contact the police. When the authorities finally arrived, they saw the remains of a woman in a state of severe decomposition. The situation was not as dire as it could have been because the remains had not been exposed to extreme heat, which partially alleviated the decomposition situation. The examination confirmed that the body belonged to Shirley and Duguay. Although it was buried, the body surfaced due to abnormal weather conditions that made the coastal soil unstable, causing it to wash away. Despite the degree of decomposition, it was obvious that Shirley had been subjected to cruelty. The exact cause of death could not be established. There were several theories. One suggested that she had been strangled, while another proposed that she was beaten with a shovel, as the shovel was found earlier. However, it could not be ruled out that the blood stain on the shovel was made after Shirley's death. The killer might have accidentally caused damage when digging up the makeshift grave. Shirley's jaw had been beaten and was broken in 3 places, with one of her missing teeth found in her lungs. The situation had changed dramatically, and it remained to be understood what the motive was, making it possible to hold Douglas accountable. After the body was discovered, investigators decided to take a fresh look at the old evidence and re-examine the area around Shirley's house and car. This yielded important results. First of all, they discovered a letter that had been overlooked earlier, contained threats. Thanks to this letter, the motive for the murder was revealed. It turned out that immediately after Shirley filed for sole custody rights, Douglas wrote her a frightening note in which he said he would be happier to see her in the grave than to lose the children forever. This could have been a cruel joke if not for the alarming fact that this letter was written in her ex-husband's blood. Unfortunately, Shirley did not have time to disclose this, publicize it, or show it to the police, as the criminal carried out his sentence earlier. Additionally, in the house of Shirley, they found photographs showing Shirley and Douglas together. He in the image wore the very jacket from which the hairs of his cat were later found. Finally, a little more than a month after the murder, Douglas was arrested and placed under custody until the hearing began. On July 19, 1996, Douglas Beamish ended up in court, largely thanks to his cat, Snowball, who was instrumental in the pursuit of justice. Douglas was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This case became the first in crime history where DNA and animal materials were used as evidence of a criminal's guilt. According to Dr. O'Brien, the day he began examining and comparing those white hairs marked the birth of veterinary forensic examination. In the following years, this practice was utilized many times and led to the imprisonment of several dangerous criminals. The center at the University of California, Davis, has used its methods in more than 500 cases over the past 15 years, confirming that the tools used to profile human DNA also work reliably on animals. Shirley's daughter, Shelley, grew up to become an advocate for abused women. She spoke about how, as a child, she watched her mother being beaten by her father. After his conviction, Douglas ended up in the Ontario Correctional Centre. In 1998 and 1999, he tried to appeal his conviction but was denied, as DNA evidence is considered irrefutable. In 2013, he first attempted to exercise his right to parole. However, He was again refused, as the commission ruled that the risk of committing another crime was too high. This was not the end of Douglas's story. After almost 25 years behind bars, discussions began about releasing the killer from prison under escort for 12 hours. Another meeting of the parole commission was held, during which relatives were present. Shirley's sister, Marie Arsenault, spoke out, stating that the murder of her sister had triggered a series of family tragedies. One sister became addicted to alcohol as a means of coping with the pain of loss. It spiraled out of control after Shirley's death. She died first due to health problems, and then her husband committed to end his own life because he could not cope with the death of his beloved wife, having tried to save her until the last moment. She insisted that if Douglas was released, he should be prohibited from living on Prince Edward Island. Shirley's father suffered a series of heart attacks after Marie spoke at the parole board meeting. Interestingly, during these hearings, Douglas took responsibility for Shirley's death for the first time. Prior to this, he had persistently denied his guilt. The commission determined that he still posed a high risk of reoffending, including crimes related to violence and cruelty. Despite finally admitting guilt and realizing the seriousness of his actions, it was believed that significant work still needed to be done before he was ready for full parole. Until that point, he had found it easier to blame others for what had happened than to face the truth. During his time in prison, Douglas suffered 3 heart attacks and kidney failure, nearly dying several times. He is currently serving his sentence in Dorchester Prison, having been transferred there a year before the hearing, during which he was granted a 12-hour escorted release. He expressed a desire to attend a rehabilitation center for ex-offenders convicted of serious crimes located in the Moncton area. Notably, the parole board noted 2 incidents demonstrating that he was not yet ready for life on the outside. In 2019, he threw a knife while preparing food in the kitchen of a minimum security correctional facility, and a year later, he went on a hunger strike, claiming dissatisfaction with the food provided by prison staff. Following the end of the meeting, a decision regarding Douglas Beamish's 12-hour temporary release was not established. He himself stated that he believed he was not ready for full release but wanted to visit a rehabilitation center in Moncton as he did not want to return to Prince Edward Island. It is worth noting that the Correctional Service of Canada had previously allowed him to be temporarily absent under escort for medical reasons and out of compassion. Both occasions took place without incident. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Thomas Kwan. On January 22, 2024, Patrick O'Hara, 70, presented to the emergency department at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne with severe pain in his upper arm, particularly at the site of the vaccine injection he had received a few hours earlier. Initially, the medical staff suspected that his pain was a result of a poor injection. They provided him with antibiotics and painkillers, advised him to monitor his arm closely. However, Patrick's situation worsened. Within hours, his arm developed blisters and changed color. The following day, he returned to the hospital, where doctors were confused by the rapid decline in his condition. Blood tests were performed but did not reveal any significant issues. Eventually, it became evident that Patrick was experiencing a necrotizing infection that was damaging his tissue, particularly around the injection site. It was likely that he had not received a vaccine but rather a toxin that led to these serious complications. To contain the infection and save Patrick's life, he required surgery to remove the infected tissue. Meanwhile, specialists were working to identify the substance that had caused his condition, as knowing the specific poison involved could help doctors formulate a more effective treatment plan. Dr. Emmett, an expert in the field, suggested that iodomethane could be responsible for Patrick's condition. Iodomethane is highly toxic, and exposure can cause burns and blisters similar to those Patrick was experiencing. There had been no prior instances of methane injections in humans, making its use particularly risky, and the substance is almost impossible to detect in the body. At around 10 a.m. on the morning of January 22, while Patrick was feeling ill, a male nurse named Raj Patel from the National Health Service arrived at his home. Nurse Raj Patel was assigned to examine Patrick and arrived at his and his partner Jenny's residence. He spoke with an Asian accent and in broken English, appearing slightly awkward but competent. The visit lasted about 4 minutes, during which he collected blood and urine samples from Patrick. Jenny, Patrick's partner, came downstairs during the check and asked to have her blood pressure taken, to which Raj agreed. After that, Patrick started preparing to administer a booster vaccine. Even though he mentioned that he had already received this vaccine less than 3 months earlier, Raj insisted that he needed another dose. When Raj administered the injection, Patrick experienced sharp and intense pain. Raj assured him that this was a normal reaction and that the pain would soon subside. However, after giving the injection, Raj quickly gathered his equipment and left the house, which Patrick found suspicious. At the hospital, where Patrick was placed in intensive care, the doctors noticed several letters that he and Jenny had received recently. They informed Jenny that there was no local nursing staff and that the National Health Service had no nurse named Raj Patel. This letter turned out to be a forgery, and the health worker was a fraud. The forgery was well crafted. It featured the National Health Service logo at the top, included hyperlinks, and used medical language along with personal privacy notes typical of unofficial reports. Another letter, sent earlier that month, followed a similar format. It included a QR code that directed Patrick to a short health questionnaire and suggested a home visit on January 22 between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. The day before this, Patrick received a reminder text message from an unknown number, claiming to be from a health worker named Patel. However, Patrick only became suspicious when Nurse Raj began to act nervously during the injection. One particular action raised alarms. As Raj was leaving, Jenny came down the stairs and told him he was as tall as her son. This startled Patrick, and she chased after him, but he disappeared. Northumbria police then began tracking him from his home in Newcastle city centre. CCTV footage showed him driving to a hotel and checking in. Raj arrived in a car with fake number plates. He checked into the hotel using a false name. 2 hours later, he left his room wearing a long coat, a flat cap, blue surgical gloves, and a medical mask. He walked through the hotel lobby and exited the building. It was less than a 10-minute walk from the hotel to Patrick and Jenny's home on St. Thomas's Street. In the UK, number plates are specific to the make and model of the vehicle they are assigned to. The number plates on Raj's vehicle were easily identifiable as counterfeit. They matched the car's make but not its model. Investigators traced the car back to the hotel that morning and then to its original location, which led them to the small town of Ingleby Barwick, south of Newcastle in Stockton. The car had left the home of Thomas Kwan, son of Jenny Leung. Jenny has several sons from her first marriage, but she noticed a resemblance between her eldest son, Thomas Kwan, 50, and Raj Patel. Thomas was born in Hong Kong and moved to the UK 39 years ago at the age of 13. His parents sent him to an English boarding school, and he later studied medicine at Newcastle University. He is now a general practitioner and a partner at Happy House Clinic in Sunderland, about a half-hour's drive from his mother's home. Thomas had a troubled relationship with his mother, likely stemming from their parents' divorce that occurred 27 years ago. Many of Thomas's issues with her revolved around money. He believed that before their separation, his mother, Jenny, had taken £1 million from their joint account and pressured his father into the divorce. Years later, when his father passed away, Thomas was upset to find that he received a smaller portion of the inheritance compared to his younger brother. In a letter to his mother, Thomas expressed his feelings, accusing her of being unfair and of stealing money from his father. He asked her to clarify the changes in the will and accused her of betrayal. Patrick, trying to ease the tension, asked Thomas to leave the house and confronted him emotionally. Jenny's actions further complicated the family dynamics. The police were called to the scene, but Thomas left before they arrived. This incident deeply affected the relationship between him and his mother, Jenny. Since then, Thomas has had little contact with her and has not visited. When authorities began investigating the case of the fake nurse, they discovered that Thomas's name appeared in their review of the nurse's route. CCTV footage showed the car traveling from Newcastle to Ingleby Barwick, heading directly to Thomas's house. This connection raised suspicions among investigators, who found it odd that a vehicle linked to the crime was seen near Thomas's residence. They quickly sought more information about him. It was revealed that there had been a conflict over a will, which could have provided a motive for his involvement. Investigators also discovered that Thomas had previously purchased chemicals, including toxic substances, which could have been used to create the agent that made Patrick sick. These online purchases became a significant focus of the investigation. The police then searched Thomas's home and found packages of chemical reagents and equipment in his garage that resembled a laboratory. They also discovered medical supplies, including syringes, gloves, and protective masks. On Thomas's computer, investigators found searches relating to toxic substances and how to use them. Additionally, there were fake National Health Service forms that matched those sent to Patrick and Jenny. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had planned the crime well in advance, using his medical expertise and available resources. He fabricated an elaborate story to pose as a fake nurse, knowing exactly how to speak, present himself, and what documents to provide. However, his rushed escape after administering the injection, along with other blunders, ultimately worked against him. The police arrested Thomas on February 15, 2024. At the time of his arrest, he denied any involvement in Patrick's poisoning, but the evidence against him grew increasingly compelling. The case was classified as attempted murder, and preparations were made for it to go to court. Thomas leveraged his medical reputation and knowledge to create a false appearance of professionalism. He orchestrated the entire scheme to avoid detection until it was too late. During a search of his home, police discovered not only chemicals and instructions but also complete production equipment, including measuring instruments, protective suits, and laboratory containers. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been planning his crime for an extended period, gathering resources and researching their characteristics. His mobile phone contained clear evidence of his intentions, showing multiple internet searches for poisons. He specifically looked for information on how to use ricin to carry out a slow and painful murder. His searches included terms like ricin dosage, duration of the toxin, and cyanide effects on the human body, indicating that he aimed to proceed carefully and minimize errors. Despite his planning, Thomas made several mistakes that led to the investigation uncovering his scheme. For example, he used a fake license plate on his car, but the police quickly noticed that the plates didn't match the car model. Additionally, his disguise as a nurse was inadequate. Jenny's comment that he resembled her son raised initial suspicions. His quick departure from home after administering the injection and his suspicious behavior further contributed to the doubts about him. Books on toxicology and instructions for creating poisons found in Thomas's possession strengthened the case against him. Additionally, a copy of the National Center of Excellence for Police Investigation Manual on Murder was discovered on his computer. This manual could provide a criminal with insights on how to avoid detection. The evidence suggested that Thomas planned to commit the murder with great precision while minimizing the risk of being caught. What was particularly alarming was how he manipulated his family. The letters, text messages, and Thomas's fabricated identity as a nurse indicated that he was orchestrating a large-scale scheme. It was shocking to think that a doctor, someone who was supposed to save lives, was involved in such a heinous crime. When arrested, Thomas denied all accusations. However, the evidence gathered, including chemicals, laboratory equipment, books, and digital records, painted an undeniable picture of his guilt. The investigation revealed that he acted with cold calculation, leveraging his expertise and resources to commit a deliberate poisoning with the intent to kill. He refused to admit guilt regarding attempted murder, but the evidence, including his internet searches, was compelling. The police also found that Thomas had been spying on his mother and her partner, Patrick. He had installed spyware on a laptop they gave him, which allowed him to monitor their daily activities, read emails, and track financial transactions in real time, taking screenshots and saving correspondence to support his suspicions of misuse of the family's money. What was especially shocking was that Thomas devised multiple plans for the murder before finally deciding to impersonate a nurse. One of his ideas involved sending poison drinks or food while pretending to be part of a made-up group called the Northern Wine Tasting Club, offering free samples. These plans revealed just how far he was willing to go to achieve his goal. When Thomas created the nurse persona, Raj Patel, he made a fake ID with his own picture, used a wig, and glued on a beard. He not only had a detailed cover story but also props to support his disguise in case anyone questioned him. During the 40 minutes he spent in the house, he managed to deceive even his own mother by acting like a caring healthcare worker. This revelation stunned those who knew Thomas. Patients were shocked to find out that their doctor was involved in such a crime. Many expressed that the trust typically inspired by a man in a doctor's uniform was ruthlessly exploited. Residents in the neighborhood watched in horror as the investigation disrupted their quiet suburb. While Patrick was in intensive care, doctors worked hard to save his life. He underwent several surgeries to remove dead tissue and stop the infection from spreading further. Additionally, he needed plastic surgery to repair the damage to his arm. Fortunately, Patrick survived, but he faces a long road to full recovery. Thomas Kwan was arrested but refused to cooperate with the medical team trying to determine what substance was injected into Patrick. By staying silent, he raised suspicions that he deliberately aimed to cause serious harm. The investigation indicated that he probably used iodine. During the proceedings, Thomas asserted that he did not intend to kill anyone, he merely sought to inflict mild pain or discomfort. However, when his trial commenced in Newcastle in October 2024, this assertion quickly fell apart in light of the evidence presented. Prosecutor Peter Makepeace, in his opening statement, reminded the jury that sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. He pointed out that Thomas's careful and detailed planning suggested that his intentions were far more serious than he claimed. Thomas's knowledge of poisons, his extensive research, and his experience made it clear that he fully understood the life-threatening nature of his actions. Moreover, Thomas's motivation went beyond mere financial gain. Even though the inheritance he received after dividing property with his relatives was relatively small, his feelings of grievance ran deeper. He accused his mother of not loving him enough during his childhood and framed the attack on Patrick, her partner, as a means to emotionally hurt her in revenge. On the second day of the trial, October 7, 2024, Thomas pleaded guilty, which spared the court from weeks of hearings. The victim, Patrick O'Hara, shared how the attack affected his life. Thomas received a severe sentence that reflected both the seriousness of his crime and the level of planning involved. The judge noted that while some aspects of Thomas's plan were poorly executed, such as using fake license plates that didn't match the car model, he had put a significant amount of effort into preparing for the crime. This level of planning justified a lengthy sentence. Thomas Kwan was sentenced to 31 years and 5 months in prison. His guilty plea and clean record prior to the incident were taken into consideration during sentencing. Patrick O'Hara faced challenges in his recovery, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which ultimately led to the end of his long-term relationship with Jenny. Despite these difficulties, Patrick expressed his appreciation for the professionals at the National Health Service who saved his life. After the trial, he gradually returned to a normal routine, though he continued to experience physical and emotional reminders of the attack. Nonetheless, this incident became a catalyst for new beginnings for him. After parting ways with Jenny, he relocated from Newcastle to a quiet coastal town where he found peace. While there, Patrick focused on helping victims of violence and fraud. He began speaking at conferences and in the media to share his story and emphasize the importance of remaining vigilant, even in everyday situations. Meanwhile, Jenny, overwhelmed by her son's actions and her guilt toward Patrick, worked on improving her family relationships. She stepped back from public life to concentrate on her family, but her bond with Thomas was never repaired. In prison, Thomas Kwan began to understand the seriousness of his actions. In isolation, he had to confront his motives and the harm he had caused to his family. However, prison records indicated that he still had a long way to go before he felt true remorse. At the beginning of his sentence, he continued to rationalize his actions, feeling a sense of injustice. Patrick, who had endured many hardships, found happiness in simple pleasures, like walks by the sea and friendships with those who valued him for who he was. He often expressed that his greatest achievement was learning to trust again. Although the scars on his hand never disappeared, he came to see them not as reminders of pain, but as symbols of the strength he discovered to keep moving forward, even in the toughest times. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of the DeFeo family. To truly understand it all, let's first get to know the DeFeo family, who once lived in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., more commonly known as Big Ronnie, was born on November 16, 1930, to parents Rocco and Antoinette DeFeo. When he was younger, Big Ronnie was slender, handsome, and had a powerful gaze reminiscent of the legendary Rudolph Valentino. With his suave looks, he attracted the attention of Louise Marie DeFeo, who was born on November 3, 1931, to Michael John Briganti Jr. and Angelina Maria Briganti. Louise had aspirations of becoming a model. She was beautiful enough to mingle with the best, including the famous singer Mel Torme. After a brief courtship, Big Ronnie and Louise married. However, the Briganti family disapproved of Big Ronnie, cutting all ties with the newlyweds until September 26, 1951, when their son Ronald DeFeo Jr. was born. He would later be known as Butch. Growing up, Butch faced many struggles as the firstborn son. His father expected a lot from him, and Big Ronnie was not afraid to discipline Butch in harsh ways. One minute he would hug his son, and the next he would throw him across the room. Louise's brother, Michael John Briganti Jr., would later testify at the DeFeo trial about an incident he witnessed when Butch was only 2 years old. He recalled, "They were all sitting down in the basement watching TV, and he don't know what the boy had done, but all of a sudden, the father just pushed the boy into the wall. The boy banged his head or part of his shoulder or something." As a child, Butch was extremely overweight, a problem that would persist until his late teenage years when he began using amphetamines. His school life suffered as a result, with bigger kids often teasing him and calling him names like the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. On July 29, 1956, Louise gave birth to a daughter, Dawn Teresa DeFeo. A few years later, on August 16, 1961, Louise gave birth to Allison Louise, and then again on September 4, 1962, to Mark Gregory. Sometime after Mark's birth, Louise decided to leave her husband for reasons that remain unclear. To win her back, Big Ronnie's determination to express his love. On October 24, 1965, Big Ronnie was blessed with a third son, John Matthew. By this time, the family had moved from their Brooklyn apartment to a lavish home on the south shore of Long Island in the affluent community of Amityville. Many wondered how Big Ronnie, working as a car dealer service manager, could afford such a luxurious home. The answer was clear: his father-in-law, Michael John Briganti Sr. In the early 1970s, Big Ronnie decided he wanted life-sized portraits to immortalize his family. Michael Jr. picked up the tab, which was estimated to be at least $50,000. The painstakingly detailed portraits took over a year to complete, and when finished, they hung in large golden frames on the staircase wall between the first and second floors of the DeFeo home. By this point, Butch had become increasingly troublesome as he got older. The DeFeos owned an auto body shop where Butch worked, but he spent more time at bars than actually working. His growing addiction to banned substance and alcohol only made things worse, driving him to violence against his own family. There was even an incident where he pulled a gun on his father, and countless other times he lashed out physically at those closest to him. Then, in the early hours of November 13, 1974, Butch completely snapped. Armed with a rifle, he moved silently through the house, murdering his family members one by one as they slept. What's truly chilling about this is that, despite the brutal killings taking place within just 15 minutes, the bodies showed no signs of struggle. Even more bizarre, the sound of gunshots didn't wake any of the other family members, or at least didn't rouse them from their beds. The bodies were found all face down on their beds, almost as if they had been carefully placed that way. To add to the eerie nature of the crime, the rifle had no silencer, yet aside from the family dog barking, none of the neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot that night. After committing the horrific murders, Butch calmly took a bath, got dressed for work, and then reported the crime, claiming he discovered the gruesome scene after returning home. He even suggested that a mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, along with 2 accomplices, was responsible. However, a police interview soon revealed serious inconsistencies in his story. The next day, Butch admitted to carrying out the murders himself. Fellini, the supposed hitman, had an airtight alibi, proving he was out of state at the time of the killings. DeFeo confessed, saying, once he started, he just couldn't stop. It went so fast. He went on to explain how he took a bath, changed his clothes, and carefully disposed of key evidence, including his blood-stained clothes, the Marlin rifle, and cartridges, before going to work as if nothing had happened. It was claimed that Butch had been hearing voices that urged him to commit the murders. However, the prosecution brought in a psychiatrist. According to the psychiatrist, Butch wasn't hearing voices or possessed by another personality. He simply didn't see anything wrong with killing his family. Because of that, DeFeo was convicted on 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, which he continued to serve at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York until he died on March 12, 2021. Just over a year after the tragic deaths of the DeFeo family, the home on Ocean Boulevard was sold to the Lutz family, who would soon unknowingly step into a new chapter of horror. The Amityville home, marked by its horrific past, raises the question of whether the tragic events left behind some lingering eerie energy haunting the land where it all unfolded. However, the Lutz family wouldn't have to wonder for long. They would soon share their own unsettling experiences in the home. Although the price was a bit higher than their budget of $30,000 to $50,000, something about the house pulled them in. It was a beautiful colonial-style home with 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a boathouse sitting right on the Amityville River. Don't think for a second that the Lutz family wasn't aware of the horrific murders that had taken place there. In fact, they knew all about the house's dark past. But despite that, the Lutzes fell in love with the property and decided it was meant to be theirs. They bought the house for a bargain price of $80,000, never once thinking it was unlivable because of its tragic history. However, what was supposed to be their dream home soon turned into a waking nightmare. The strange and terrifying events that followed were later shared with the world by author Jay Anson in his famous book, The Amityville Horror. Before moving into the house, George Lutz was a successful businessman, but after settling in new house, something changed. He became sluggish, cold, and irritable. Most bizarre of all, he started waking up at 3:15 in the morning every night, unable to get back to sleep. It wasn't just random, it was the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. One night, George was startled to see his 5-year-old daughter, Missy, standing by her bedroom window. But what sent chills down his spine was the eerie outline of a pig's face with glowing red eyes staring at him from behind her. He rushed into her room, only to find Missy sound asleep, as if nothing had happened. Not long after, Missy talked about a new friend, an imaginary pig named Jody. But was Jody really imaginary? In another bone-chilling moment, George looked at his wife Kathy as she lay sleeping, but something was horribly wrong. Her face had distorted and aged, as if she'd become a 90-year-old woman overnight. At times, Kathy seemed to undergo strange transformations, aging rapidly and looking like someone else entirely. Her mother even witnessed this unnatural change firsthand. But the strange events didn't stop there. The house seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors were ripped off their hinges, and in the middle of a freezing winter, a room was suddenly filled with flies. Outside, cloven hoofprints appeared in the snow, right near their doorstep. Inside, green slime started to ooze down the walls, and then in the basement, they discovered a hidden room that didn't appear on any of the house's original blueprints. The room was painted a deep, unsettling red and was only large enough for two people to sit close together. But what was even more disturbing was the faint rancid odor that lingered in the room, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air. George even tried bringing their family dog into the mysterious basement room, but the animal refused to step inside. The usually dog backed away, tail tucked, and whimpered in fear. It was the first time George had ever seen the dog so terrified, as if it sensed something lurking in the shadows, something invisible to human eyes but deeply unsettling to an animal's instincts. The eerie experiences didn't stop there. One night, George was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of a band playing downstairs. The lively music echoed through the house as if an invisible group was holding a late night gathering. Confused and unnerved, he made his way to the living room to investigate, but the moment he stepped inside, everything went silent. No music, no people, nothing. Yet something had definitely been there. The rug had been rolled up, and the furniture had been shifted, as if a dance floor had been cleared for a ghostly celebration. Desperate for help, the Lutz family reached out to a priest, hoping for some kind of blessing or relief from the terrifying events. However, the moment the priest stepped into the house, things took a dark turn. He was overwhelmed by a sudden intense sickness and began to experience his own set of unexplained disturbances. Some force seemed to be warning him to stay away. The impact of these events reached far beyond the Lutz family. Author J. Anson recalled how meeting the priest convinced him that this was more than just a story, it was real. From there, he started to create the book. On January 14, 1976, after just 28 days of living in what they thought would be their dream home, the Lutz family experienced a night so terrifying that they made a split-second decision. They packed a few bags, left everything else behind, and fled, never to return. According to a 2005 interview with George Lutz, he emphasized that their departure wasn't planned. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they were leaving for good. This was their home. When they left, they didn't know they wouldn't be coming back. They didn't know that everything they left behind they would never see again. Their abandoned belongings, untouched and frozen in time, were later set to be auctioned off. The house that had once seemed like a fresh start had turned into something they could never return to. Determined to share their horrifying experience, the Lutz family recounted every chilling detail to writer Anson. He would go on to transform their story into the instant bestseller in 1977. The book gripped the public, with the Los Angeles Times calling it both fascinating and frightening. Some critics believed its success wasn't just about ghosts and haunted houses. They argued that the story resonated with people because of the unstable political and economic climate in the United States at the time. Rampant inflation, rising interest rates, a crippling oil shortage had left the country anxious and uneasy. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the horrors inside the Amityville house weren't the only ones haunting the Lutz family. Their business was struggling due to the failing economy, and at the worst possible time, the IRS launched an investigation into their taxes. For many readers in the late 70s, this felt all too real, paranormal or not. Financial stress and uncertainty were things they knew all too well. By blending supernatural terror with real, life struggles, the Amityville horror struck a nerve with the American public. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a reflection of the fears people were living with every day. Some critics even argued that the book cleverly capitalized on popular horror trends of the time, the trope of a once-loving father turning violent and unrecognizable. When asked if he had experienced anything strange while writing the book, Anson quickly dismissed the idea, replying, "No, however, he did suffer a heart attack soon after finishing it, though he insisted it was due to his smoking and unhealthy lifestyle rather than anything paranormal." But while Anson shrugged off any supernatural connection, eerie incidents followed those who got too close to the story. Several people who handled early copies of the manuscript reportedly had near-fatal encounters. One of Anson's friends had a fire break out in his car while driving the manuscript back to the publisher. Another friend and his son nearly drowned when their car plunged into the water, but when rescuers opened the trunk, the manuscript inside was mysteriously dry, despite being stored in a simple clasped envelope. In the most chilling case, a woman who had been given the first 2 chapters to read died in a house fire the very night she received them, and among the charred remains of her home, the pages of the manuscript were found completely untouched. The terrifying tale of the Lutz family has since been adapted into several films, with the most famous being the 1979 version starring James Brolin. In 2005, the Amityville Horror returned to the big screen with Ryan Reynolds stepping into the role of George Lutz, following in the footsteps of James Brolin. Both movies stayed true to the eerie backstory of the infamous house where a gruesome mass murder had taken place, but they each took creative liberties to crank up the terror. Then there's how the house itself is portrayed. The older film leans into the idea that the house is a sinister entity influencing Ronald DeFeo Jr. to kill his family in 1974, while the remake shifts the horror to the ghosts of the victims, making them the primary source of terror. The priest who tried to help the Lutz family also meets different fates depending on the version. In the book, he hears a voice commanding him to get out and later becomes ill, eventually giving up on helping the family. The films, however, escalate the horror, showing him being attacked by swarms of supernatural flies and even going blind. Regardless of these differences, one chilling fact remains: an entire family was murdered in that house. Yet despite the Lutz family's claims of paranormal experiences in 1975, no other owners have reported hauntings since. According to the Washington Post and real estate firm Coldwell Banker, Harbor Light, 4 different families have lived in the house after the Lutzes. A previous owner even had the address changed to avoid unwanted attention. The last time the house went up for sale was in the summer of 2016, and it was sold in February 2017 for just over $600,000, significantly less than the $950,000 it was purchased for in 2010. As for the real murders that took place, while Butch was eventually found dead in his prison cell, there are countless versions of events and interviews he gave before his death. In an interview from 1986, Butch claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father, and that their mother killed his siblings before he killed her. He later filed a motion in 1990 stating that Dawn and an unknown assailant were the real killers, that he only shot Dawn by accident during a struggle. Despite his shifting stories, his claims were always met with skepticism. In 2000, he spoke with author R.I. Auna, asserting that his parents plotted to kill him, which led him to join forces with Dawn and others in desperation. Butch's narrative continued to evolve, becoming increasingly distant with details about the events and unreliable witnesses. His claims, including involvement from his wife Geraldine Gates, only deepened the mystery, with authorities and experts disproving many of his assertions. Now, it's easy to lean toward the idea that Butch was simply a psychopath driven by childhood trauma or addiction, who saw no problem in killing his family. However, if the lingering souls of his victims did haunt the Lutz family, we can only hope they found justice and peace. The saga of the DeFeo family in the house at 112 Ocean Avenue remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic chapters in American crime and lore. From Ronald Butch's cold-blooded slaughter of his family in 1974 to the Lutz family's harrowing 28-day ordeal a year later, the Amityville Horror transcends a mere murder case, weaving a tapestry of trauma, mystery, and supernatural intrigue. Butch's shifting confessions and unrepentant nature leave us questioning whether his actions stem from a fractured mind or something darker, while the Lutz's flight from inexplicable terror suggests the house itself may hold echoes of its violent past. Decades later, with Butch gone and the house standing quietly under new ownership, its legacy endures, immortalized in books and films, yet shrouded in doubt. Whether driven by human evil or lingering spirits, the tragedy of Amityville serves as a chilling reminder of the shadows that can lurk within families and homes, leaving us to wonder where the line between reality and nightmare truly lies. Jessica Edens was born on January 22, 1981, in a small suburb of New York State, USA. She came from a large family, with a sister named Diane and 2 half-brothers, Nathan and Adam. Jessica spent her early years surrounded by loving parents and siblings, with whom she developed warm relationships. She didn't have outstanding academic success but was always creative, dreaming of becoming a photographer. When her parents recognized this passion, they bought her an amateur camera, which she carried everywhere. She took pictures of people, nature, cities, and architecture, anything that caught her attention. Her work was admired and praised. During her teenage years, Jessica actively pursued this passion and mastered the craft. She began to shoot weddings and various events, initially for free, then for a small fee. This allowed her to earn enough money for her own needs, and the idea of building a real business became increasingly appealing. Jessica's personal life was also progressing. She was sociable, active, attractive, and always attracted a lot of attention. On November 19, 2007, she gave birth to a son named Hayden King. Jessica became pregnant during a rapidly developing relationship with a young man, but the love between them faded quickly, and they broke up before Hayden was born. However, Jessica remained optimistic and maintained friendly relations with the child's biological father, allowing him to communicate with Hayden. Jessica was determined to provide everything her child needed, regardless of whether she had a partner or was raising him as a single mother. Fortunately, she did not have to be alone for long. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. They quickly found common ground, grew closer, and within a few meetings, they could not imagine their lives without each other. They was in no hurry to officially register their marriage, as both were creative individuals who understood each other well. After a few months, they moved in together, and Jessica began to contemplate having more children. After a while, they officially got married in 2010. Shortly thereafter, they decided to move to a new large house located in a small, cozy town in Easley, South Carolina, which was ideal for a quiet family life. Their family relationships flourished, and Jessica was convinced she had found the man of her dreams, a feeling that was mutual. 2 years later, on July 19, 2012, they welcomed a daughter named Harper Edens. Jessica believes this further strengthens her relationship with Benjamin. He was a wonderful father who spent all his free time with Harper. He also became so close to Hayden that the boy did not suspect Benjamin was not his biological father. By 2017, Hayden was in the 4th grade, while his younger sister Harper was about to start 1st grade in the fall. This was an exciting milestone. From the outside, Jessica's family appeared perfect. She had 2 children, a beloved job, and a husband whom she described to everyone as the best person. Her eldest child was a good student, and the family expected the same from Harper. Jessica's passion for photography thrived, but when she had her daughter, she decided to take a break and become a housewife, stepping back from her small but successful photo business. However, as Harper grew more independent, Jessica returned to attending various events to conduct professional photography. To simplify her client search, she created a website where she introduced herself as a photographer from Greenville. Jessica described her life as perfect, but, as often happens, things were exaggerated. Behind the facade of love and understanding, difficulties began to arise in the marriage. Over time, Benjamin's feelings cooled, and tension accumulated between them. Jessica wanted to understand what was happening as she began to notice uncharacteristic behaviors in her husband. He would come home from work, immediately run into the shower without even saying hello to his wife and children, as if he were trying to hide something. More and more often, he stayed at work much longer than his shift lasted, citing overtime and global projects that no one could confirm. He began to actively engage in sports, carefully monitored his appearance, and switched to healthy eating. All this could look like ordinary healthy habits that people develop with age, but not with Jessica. She began to suspect Benjamin of cheating. Quickly, a suitable candidate for an affair appeared. A young, attractive woman had recently started at her husband's workplace. This woman's name was Meredith Rahm. She was born on October 29, 1988, in Collierville, Tennessee. In Jessica's opinion, it was on Meredith that her husband had set his eyes. In the early years of Meredith's life, her parents divorced, and her mother quickly found a new man and remarried, so Meredith had a stepfather named Carlton Chambers. He was a worthy person and became like a second father to her. The family in which she grew up was friendly and loving. Meredith had a younger sister named Brittany Rowell. She dedicated herself to her studies from an early age and was focused on career success. She studied well and was creative, like Jessica, but family and children were of little interest to her. In 2009, she graduated from the University of Memphis with a bachelor's degree in international business. After gaining some necessary experience, she moved to Greenville. Meredith was very independent and self-confident, which immediately caught Benjamin's eye. By the time they met, Meredith had started working at the same company as Benjamin. In fact, Jessica's suspicions were justified. Immediately after meeting Meredith, her husband became attracted to her. Their feelings come from both sides. They started dating in secret, and their affair continued for a year. Now, Benjamin finally realized that he wanted to be with his young mistress and wanted to break up with Jessica, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He was afraid of offending his wife and wanted to avoid the difficulties of the divorce process. For a long time, Benjamin was torn between his family and his mistress. His wife's suspicions only aggravated the situation. The more accusations she made, the more inevitable the breakup felt, which provoked constant quarrels. Jessica did not trust her husband and wanted to find out what was going on. He tried to distance himself, but this could not go on forever. It was time to tell the truth, but Benjamin could not bring himself to do it. Instead of confessing, he decided to move out on far-fetched grounds, citing constant pressure from his wife. On April 11, 2017, Benjamin packed his things and moved from the shared family home to a rented apartment. At least that is what he initially told his wife. Jessica kept hoping that these were only temporary difficulties that many people experience, and that their marriage would be saved. She believed she could convince her husband to return to her and their children. Benjamin tried to avoid the topic of separation altogether, reluctantly answered calls and messages, which only offended her more. The betrayal was of such a magnitude that she could not forgive it. She was angry, and her hopes for a family reunion were shattered. But most of all, she was furious that Benjamin simply ignored her. As the persecution began, Jessica spread various damaging facts about Meredith on all social networks and on any sites where she could post information, exposing her as the homewrecker and her husband as a cheater. Jessica continued to communicate regularly with Benjamin, trying to win him back. Instead, he finally decided to file for divorce. Telling Jessica this provoked even more anger from her, and she now decided to annoy him as much as possible. She knew how much Benjamin loved their daughter Harper, so she sought sole custody of the girl. He had always been a caring father and loved the children, including Hayden. Therefore, he was against such a decision. Benjamin wanted to maintain the right to communicate with the children. He did not want to sit idly by. He hoped to smooth over the conflict and therefore proposed joint custody. Jessica was adamant. Against this backdrop, a serious custody battle began, and tensions escalated. Realizing that it would not be possible to agree amicably, Benjamin went to court on July 11th. He wanted to gain an advantage and testified under oath that Jessica was using the children as a weapon of revenge. By this point, Jessica had completely prevented meetings and communication between the children with their father, not even allowing contact through social networks and mobile phones. Everything was under her total control. Benjamin was afraid she could go too far. Simultaneously, Jessica intensified her harassment of Benjamin and Meredith. She continued to post not just hateful words toward Meredith on social media but also used graphic photos and other offensive captions. Previously, Jessica had tried to portray Benjamin's mistress as a family destroyer. Now, even more disturbing captions began to appear. She claimed that Meredith would get what she deserved, though she never specified what she meant. Meredith, the target of the harassment, began to fear that all of this could be dangerous. However, Benjamin insisted that Jessica had no history of violence, so he believed the situation would gradually settle down. He tried not to provoke her further, but it had little effect. The situation only worsened. When Jessica learned about the filing of a joint custody application by her husband, she was furious. Benjamin had always been a decent person, a valuable employee who earned a good salary and had no bad habits or addictions, so there were no serious grounds for denying him custody or terminating his contact with the children. He simply wanted to see them. Now that he had received the right to visit, which Jessica could not oppose. Due to the impossibility of taking revenge, she began to come up with more sophisticated ways to annoy him. Every short communication with Benjamin ended in conflicts and accusations. It was even more annoying to her that the mistress would be in contact with the children. During this period, Benjamin and Meredith regularly contacted the police to complain about Jessica's behavior. In particular, Meredith could no longer tolerate the publications that Jessica made about her daily on various social networks. She starts having problems at work when Jessica tries to turn things around her. Benjamin tried to prove that Jessica's behavior was stalking and very disturbing. Worse, he began receiving frightening messages from Jessica, all concerning the children. It seemed she was trying to intimidate him with ambiguous phrases, and he worried that his daughter might be in danger. In July 2017, after a court meeting, he called the police to check on the welfare of the children at Jessica's house. He described the situation in detail. He felt powerless since Jessica still interfered with the meetings, and he did not want to use force, fearing she would use this in court against him to strip him of his joint custody rights. The officers who responded reported that everything was fine, but the anxiety from the threats continued to grow. On July 12, they discussed joint custody again. All attempts by Jessica to prevent this were unsuccessful, making her even more furious. During the day, Benjamin begins to receive more disturbing messages from his ex-wife. It was obvious to her that there was no legal way to limit the children's communication with their father, so she tried to irritate him further with her frightening messages. Benjamin contacted the police again and asked the patrol officers to go to the family home to check on the children's well-being. When the officers arrived, they again did not see anything suspicious. The report compiled by the patrolman stated that everything was fine, the family seemed normal, Jessica behaved calmly, and her son and daughter were in a good mood while watching a movie when the officers arrived. At that moment, Jessica insisted that Harper call Benjamin, realizing that he had called the police. All of this became part of her insidious plan to expose him as a liar. While the officer was in the house, he discussed the potential resumption of relations with Benjamin. Jessica denied wanting to reconcile, calling him a traitor who had cheated for a whole year. She couldn't forgive him and intended to use this in court to achieve sole custody of their daughter. She didn't want him in the children's lives. While the officer was filling out the report, Jessica began insisting that Benjamin and Meredith were very dangerous people, especially to the children. She claimed to have suffered from their behavior since the divorce process began and insisted that they were trying to portray her in a bad light. Jessica wanted to obtain a restraining order against them. The patrolman informed Jessica that, in order to get a restraining order, she would have to go through the court process after filing a report. After saying goodbye to the officers, she promised to file a statement in person soon, but that was not destined to happen. The next day, while Jessica's family was out of town, she went to her parents' house early in the morning and took a .40 caliber pistol that they used for self-defense. When relatives heard about this, Jessica warned her father about the need for a weapon, and he was not against it. They did not suspect the scale of the persecution that Jessica had arranged. She skillfully lied, making Benjamin look worse and referring to the persecution from him, that the danger emanating from her ex. Jessica claimed that she could not feel calm at home, she was simply afraid to be left alone with her 2 children. They were easily convinced that Benjamin and Meredith posed a threat, including to the children, and that the weapon would help protect them from what she described as extremely harmful communication. All of this sounded plausible, therefore, her parents had no problem with her needing the weapon for a while. Jessica planned to keep the gun in the house while the divorce process was ongoing. Jessica then sent text messages filled with accusations, now targeting everyone who knew Meredith. She managed to find information about the family and friends of Meredith, copying the messages to everyone, then telling them how Meredith had stolen her husband, destroyed her family, and was now trying to take the children. Jessica obtained the phone numbers of at least 5 friends of family members on social media. It seemed she was immersed in this all day, displaying behavior that resembled madness. She even personally called several people, relaying her story over her mobile phone. Some of Jessica's acquaintances became disappointed in her decency, causing real damage to her reputation. Benjamin also received even more terrifying messages. Jessica openly accused and intimidated him, stating that he would not receive anything, he would not gain access to Meredith and the children. Jessica wrote that because of his actions, he would have no chance of getting any of it, as she would not allow him to enjoy life after what he had done. Benjamin was extremely worried about this information and began to send Jessica message after message, trying to understand what she meant. However, she simply ignored all his questions, which only increased Benjamin's anxiety. He expressed his willingness to go to court for an emergency hearing regarding joint custody of the children, even threatened to try to take the children from her if she did not calm down. Finally, Jessica responded with a short message, "Your life will soon be better." Benjamin was sure that she was just mocking him and enjoying this situation. Jessica claimed that it was the last day she would experience pain, after which she ignored any attempts by Benjamin to contact her. On the morning of July 13, 2017, Jessica wrote to Benjamin again. She offered to meet so that Benjamin could answer some questions. However, Benjamin found everything very suspicious and hesitated to attend the meeting. He didn't suspect that this could turn out to be a fatal mistake. Benjamin tried to get her to talk on the phone to understand what she needed and why they couldn't discuss it without a meeting, but this only made Jessica even angrier. At 4:41 p.m., he received another message in which Jessica complained that she was tired of this bullying that never meant anything to Benjamin. In reality, old accusations and the most frightening threats she had ever voiced since the breakup emerged. Jessica's behavior was so alarming that Benjamin contacted her mother to discuss the situation, suspecting that Jessica was having a breakdown. He feared she could not control herself, might pose a danger to herself and the children. At that time, he was at work and could not leave. He did not suspect that while he was talking to Jessica's mother, Jessica was already driving to his apartment with bad intentions. At about 5 p.m., Jessica parked her car near the complex where Benjamin and Meredith lived. In the parking lot, Jessica saw Meredith, who had just returned from work and was sitting in her car, distracted by the mail on her mobile phone. Jessica approached her, pointed a gun, and shot through the glass, instantly killing her rival, whom she considered the cause of all her troubles. All this happened in broad daylight. As people were returning from work, the noise attracted numerous witnesses. After the incident, people saw Jessica get into her car and drive away. Neighbors contacted the police, reporting this and clarifying one frightening detail. At that time, there were 2 children in the car with the shooter. Witnesses described the shooter, and the police understood who they were talking about. They assumed that Benjamin was in danger. Jessica had enough time to act, but she was not going to go to Benjamin's workplace. Instead, she devised something much more sophisticated and stayed one step ahead of law enforcement. While the authorities were still looking for her in the city and were awaiting Benjamin's arrival at work, Jessica called Benjamin, told him that everyone he loved had left and that she would be next. Then Jessica hung up. It was the last call she made. Police eventually traced the call and went to Easley, 7 miles from the Benjamin home, where they saw her Jeep. The doors of the car were locked from the inside, and the engine was still running. Inside, they found 3 bodies, 2 children and Jessica herself, who was 36 years old. Jessica had persistently called Benjamin in hopes of meeting with him, perhaps intending him to be her first victim. However, he seemed to sense danger and avoided contact as much as possible, often opting to respond via a message on a messaging app. When she received a refusal, she flared up in anger and attacked Meredith, after which Jessica returned home. Near her house, she called Benjamin again. After a meaningless conversation, Jessica first attacked her 5-year-old daughter, then her 9-year-old son, after which she turned the gun on herself. Jessica used the same gun that she had borrowed from her parents on July 11th. During the investigation, detectives found out that Benjamin had been trying to obtain a restraining order against Jessica. He had filed for joint custody on the same day and had communicated with the police officer who came to check on the children. Jessica left 4 suicide notes, one for her mother, one for her father, one for her son's father, and one for her husband. In these notes, she expressed her love for her family and her regret for the pain her actions would cause them. Jessica insisted that she could no longer live with these feelings and believed that her children would also suffer without her, so she decided to take not only her life but theirs as well. In the letter to her son's father, she expressed gratitude for giving her her first child and apologized for the pain she had caused. Considering the content of these notes, the police investigated suspicions of domestic violence against the children. Judging by what Jessica wrote, it was possible she had harmed them as a way of exacting revenge on her unfaithful husband. However, nothing like this could be confirmed. As for the last note left by Jessica to Benjamin, it contained several short phrases in which she wished that Benjamin would experience the pain from his cruel act for the rest of his life. The note also stated that he would not be able to hurt them anymore. Among all the individuals involved in this case, Benjamin was the only survivor. The note turned out to be prophetic. Even to this day, he continues to live with the pain of losing his loved ones. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Sophie Bouniel was born on July 28, 1957, in Paris, France. She grew up in a renowned and wealthy family, with significant influence in the fashion and film industries. Sophie was artistic, talented, and assertive, which led her to a successful career as a film producer, making her a recognizable face and a symbol of success in the country. However, Sophie still prioritized her personal life and family happiness. In 1991, she married film producer Daniel Toscan du Plantier, and since then, she has been known as Sophie Toscan du Plantier. Their meeting was serendipitous, as both were entrenched in the film industry and matched each other's stature. They became symbols of luxury and wealth during that period, and their marriage attracted significant attention from the media. As both continued to thrive in their careers, they moved into a lavish mansion with Sophie's son from her first marriage. Sophie is a strong and energetic person, capable of resolutely defending her beliefs and continuously pursuing her dreams. Those close to her know that she is also a gentle, kind, and loving mother. The focus of her life was her son, Pierre-Louis Baudy. Furthermore, Sophie takes care of her image as a glamorous and fashionable woman, often attracting the attention of the media and reporters in the entertainment industry. As Sophie aged, she began to desire greater privacy, tranquility, and a family life away from the relentless scrutiny of admirers and strangers. In the early 90s, she started spending more time at her home in the rural area of Dunmanus West, near Cork, Ireland, a place she had enjoyed visiting as a child. Cork had become a popular retreat for affluent artists and writers drawn to its picturesque scenery. The hustle and bustle of Paris made her feel tired, so she decided to choose to live in this quiet and cozy place. In 1993, she purchased a cottage there. Unlike the villas she was accustomed to, this cottage posed some challenges, as it was in a remote area that was not always easy to access. However, for Sophie, the seclusion and peace it promised made it worth it. Even after she arrived, she faced issues with electricity and heating, which were often unreliable. Despite these difficulties, they did not significantly impact her ability to relax. Sophie was drawn to the local landscapes and the charm of the province because they helped her restore her emotional strength and inspired fond memories of her carefree childhood. After a long time away, she returned and was captivated by the beauty of nature, feeling as if she had fallen in love with it all over again. From then on, she chose to focus on the positives and disregard any inconveniences. Sophie typically spent her summers there but always returned to Paris, where she viewed this time as a period of spiritual and emotional renewal. Sophie usually goes there alone. The same thing happened in December 1996, when she was 39 years old, and she decided to visit Ireland to rejuvenate herself and read movie scripts before the new year. Arriving alone, she settled into her home in a quiet neighborhood. While she enjoyed her solitude, She wasn't a recluse, she interacted with her neighbors and childhood friends living nearby, was often seen around town. Sophie had established friendly relationships with many locals and always treated them as equals. Because of this, people didn't see her as just a woman from Bohemian Paris but rather as the familiar girl they remembered from their hometown. She engaged in pleasant conversations, deliberately steering clear of work and personal topics to avoid drawing attention and gossip. Before Christmas, a neighbor visited Sophie at her home. On December 23, 1996, around 10 a.m., she intended to chat about holiday plans and enjoy a cup of tea. However, instead of a friendly visit, she discovered a lifeless woman lying in the mud in front of the house. Alarmed, she immediately called the police to report a body near Sophie's residence. The condition of the body was so severe that she wasn't even sure it was Sophie. When the Irish police arrived, they encountered a gruesome scene. The woman's head was so badly damaged that she was unrecognizable, but she was confirmed to be Sophie Toscan du Plantier. At the time of her death, she was still wearing her nightgown and had on boots. The bedding in her bedroom was disheveled, suggesting that she had been awakened suddenly during the night or early morning and hurried outside, putting on her street shoes in the process. Nearby, authorities discovered a large concrete block covered in blood, which is believed to be the murder weapon. Bloody footprints led away from the scene towards the front gate, where the keys were still in the lock. Inside the house, 2 wine glasses were found in the dish drainer, leading detectives to speculate that the attack likely occurred outdoors, as there were no signs of a struggle indoors. Local police were not accustomed to dealing with such severe crimes in the area. The local precinct was small and lacked experienced investigators, so they had to wait for forensic experts from a larger city to arrive. These experts needed to thoroughly examine the crime scene in Sophie's body. They arrived just 1 day later, but during that time, Sophie's body remained at the outdoor scene. The weather was rainy and cold, and they could only cover her with plastic bags. Unfortunately, the damp conditions ruined some critical evidence. Once the investigation officially began, the police quickly noticed signs of a struggle on Sophie's hands. However, the passage of time made it difficult to evaluate these signs accurately. Most of the blood had been washed away by the rain, leaving investigators with very little evidence to work with. Forensic experts were engaged in reconstructing the incident that led to Sophie's death. It became clear that she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Some faint traces of blood were discovered on the gate and the entrance, but much of it had also been compromised by rain. Since Sophie was wearing boots and the blood was primarily found on the street side, investigators believed the attack likely began there. No signs of a struggle were found inside the house, and although 2 glasses of wine were found in the dish drainer, they could not be considered reliable evidence since they were already clean. It was uncertain when those glasses were used, as Sophie may have used them at different times by herself. Several DNA samples were collected from the crime scene, but in 1996, testing in profile comparison technology was very limited. This crucial evidence did not lead to any useful information, however, it was preserved in the archives. Detectives attempted to piece together the timeline of Sophie's activities since her arrival in Ireland. They discovered that she had arrived on December 21st. That same day, she was seen shopping at a grocery store, appearing relaxed while casually exploring the area. Sophie engaged in friendly conversations with several locals who were familiar with her. One store owner recalled that a man in a black coat and hat entered the store shortly after Sophie. Witnesses noted that this man appeared to be watching her and left as soon as she did, suggesting he might have been following her. It was obvious to those who were present that he showed no interest in shopping, as he didn't buy anything. No one else seemed to notice this suspicious individual on December 21st. On December 22nd, Sophie went for a walk along a path leading to a nearby castle perched on a rocky ledge. She took in the views from the observation deck before walking back to the city. She stopped by a local pub where she ordered tea and chatted with some regular patrons. Eventually, Sophie returned to her home and did not go out again until late at night when she contacted her husband, Daniel, who was in Paris. This information helped investigators establish the timeline of the incident. Sophie's body was discovered at 10 a.m. the following morning, suggesting the attack occurred sometime between midnight and that time. Given the nature of the crime, investigators believed the killer was likely someone from Sophie's close circle, as is often the case in similar situations. The first suspect was Sophie's husband, Daniel. There were whispers that their marriage was struggling. As the police delved deeper into their family dynamics, they uncovered that the strain was due to Daniel's ongoing infidelity. Sophie had expressed her desire to end the relationship even before her trip to Ireland, viewing the getaway as a chance to relieve stress before the separation. Since both individuals were prominent and wealthy, the divorce would likely have been complex and highly publicized. Financial motivations can often lead to violent acts. However, Daniel was quickly cleared as a suspect when he claimed he was in France at the time of the murder, a claim corroborated by numerous witnesses, providing him with a solid alibi. The situation was further complicated by the fact that the murder occurred in a town with an insufficient police force, leaving them lacking the resources needed for a thorough investigation. This resulted in delays while they sifted through various theories and false claims. At this point, investigators considered the possibility that the murderer was familiar with both the victim, Sophie, and the local area, as the crime was committed without attracting attention. This explained the absence of outcry during the incident, even from neighborhood dogs, who would have recognized the perpetrator's scent but may not have reacted. Subsequently, detectives focused their attention on a man named Ian Kenneth Bailey. Ian was born in Manchester in 1957 and had a troubled past, as well as a troubled reputation. He started his career as a freelance journalist, owned a business, and held various jobs before moving to Ireland in 1991. At the time of the murder, Ian was living with his girlfriend and had experienced run-ins with local law enforcement. In 1991, Ian started a business but soon faced serious issues. He became involved in several troubling incidents after assaulting his business partner. Conflicts with authorities resulted in his conviction for assault later that year, and he spent some time in jail. Ian had a history with local police due to his temper and aggressive behavior, including previous domestic violence incidents that even led to his partner being hospitalized, although he was not jailed for those cases. Ian underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had a narcissistic personality disorder. He was noted to be impulsive and cruel, with indications of various mental health issues. Experts described him as someone with very high self-esteem and a problem with alcohol, contributing to his unpredictable and violent outbursts. He claimed that his behavior was partly due to a difficult divorce that had occurred shortly before he moved to West Cork. There were additional reasons to consider him a suspect. His house was close to Sophie's, making it easy for him to approach her without being noticed. At that time, Ian was living with his girlfriend, Catherine Jules Thomas, who was also a local resident. Remarkably, on December 23rd, shortly after Sophie's body was discovered, they were among the first to arrive at the crime scene and possessed knowledge of many details about the crime. Catherine and Ian attempted to gather more information from the police to create a report. Ian claimed to be an independent journalist looking for a story, but he was denied access to the crime scene. The police noted that they were very insistent, even entering the house without permission. Upon checking his background, it became clear that he had a criminal history, raising doubts about his true identity as a reporter. Despite the police's objections, Ian managed to publish several negative articles. His aggressive pursuit of information only deepened the police's suspicions about him. The articles were filled with inappropriate details and speculation about Sophie's personal life, shocking her relatives with their lack of ethics and Ian's cynicism. Following the publication of these articles, a wave of public outrage ensued. Sophie's relatives publicly rejected Ian's claims by appearing on television. They believed that he was trying to tarnish Sophie's name for the sake of fame and profit. They agreed with law enforcement that Ian might be involved and regarded him with skepticism. When questioned by the police, Ian denied ever knowing Sophie. However, close friends of Sophie, who had known her since childhood, were convinced that Ian was connected to the crime. The media contributed to this belief by suggesting that Ian was involved in her death. Despite this, Ian maintained his innocence, citing his notes and a mysterious informant who allegedly provided him with crucial information, although he refused to reveal this person's identity. In Ian's writings, he not only focused on Sophie but also on a criminal within her circle of friends, who had hired a hitman. He suspected that this individual could be one of Sophie's ex-lovers or even her husband, who was in the process of divorcing her. While they were busy disputing these claims, a significant anonymous tip came in from a local resident. The witness reported seeing an unknown man near Sophie's house around 3 a.m. on December 23rd. The description of this man matched the appearance of a man that a local shop owner had seen chasing Sophie. Strangely, this anonymous witness provided a detailed and accurate description that matched Ian Kenneth Bailey's appearance exactly. A few days later, he was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Once there, he acted very nervously, created a scene, and made threats regarding the situation. Detectives quickly noticed suspicious scratches on his face and hands. When questioned about them, he claimed that he had been hurt by a Christmas tree that fell while he was cutting it down in the forest. Police were skeptical of Ian's explanation and took photos of the scratches, which only made him more agitated. Although his behavior seemed overly aggressive, he attributed it to his mental health issues. He denied knowing Sophie and insisted on his own theory, suggesting that one of her former partners might have hired someone to kill her. He loudly claimed that it was Daniel, not him, who should be investigated. Authorities believed that the criminal was a local who knew the area well, which explained how he could get to Sophie's house without leaving any evidence. Ian argued that the forensic team took too long to arrive at the crime scene, allowing rain to wash away any potential evidence, and insisted that being a local was irrelevant. He criticized the initial investigation as negligent and accused the police of attempting to pin the blame on him. Detectives interviewed Ian's friends, who reported seeing him at a local pub the night before the crime. Ian had no scratches on his face, making it improbable that he ventured into the forest at night to retrieve a Christmas tree after leaving the bar. Despite numerous objections, he was arrested on February 10, 1997, after new information emerged. Another key witness, Ian's ex-wife Jules Thomas, provided a statement. She was very concerned about potential charges from the police, which prompted her to speak up. She confirmed that she indeed met Sophie in the store on December 21, 1996. Ian learned about Sophie's arrival and went to find her to get a story. Jules also suggested that he might have followed Sophie to an observation deck on the 22nd, where she went to admire the castle. On that same day, when Ian returned, he acted very mysteriously and strangely, even commenting that something terrible might happen in the city that night. He never clarified what had made him anxious. Later that evening, Ian went out for a walk, but when he returned, he left again, only to come back an hour later. He assumed Jules was asleep, but she woke up several times throughout the night and did not find him at home. Finally, Ian confessed that he had gone to the nearby studio to work until 9 a.m. The inconsistencies in his statements and Jules's admissions led to his detention. However, within 12 hours, no solid evidence was found linking him to the murder. Under Irish law, if there is insufficient evidence to convict a suspect within 12 hours of arrest, the suspect must be released. As a result, he was released due to insufficient evidence. Despite being a prime suspect, law enforcement had no choice but to let him go. However, public suspicion towards him increased. Ian's behavior became increasingly erratic, which he attributed to mental health issues. The stress of being implicated as a possible murderer took a toll on his well-being, and he began experiencing hallucinations. He also tried to blame the police for defaming him, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The rumors he spread began to sound nonsensical. On January 27, 1998, they decided to arrest Ian again. He maintained his innocence and argued that the police had no evidence against him. Detectives pointed to the only DNA evidence found at the crime scene, which did not belong to Sophie. However, it was of poor quality due to contamination from prolonged exposure to the elements. This made it impossible to definitively link Ian to the murder, creating a significant hurdle for the investigation. Under Irish law, an individual can only be arrested twice without being charged for a crime. Ian maintained his innocence throughout the process. During his second arrest, authorities had just 12 hours to establish his involvement in the murder. He felt pressure to confess, which only fueled his anger. He sought to leverage his connections in journalism to discredit the local police, claiming that authorities were attempting to make him a scapegoat. Detectives believed Ian was simply aware of his legal rights and was stalling. Despite public suspicion of his guilt, he attributed his unusual interest in the case to his work as a journalist, stating that he was only pursuing a sensational story. This explained his presence while Sophie was alive. The police could not find any evidence against him, and he was released, leading to a standstill in the investigation. In 2003, Ian sued several news organizations for libel, as his connection to the murder had never been established. He sought to clear his name through legal action against the media. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified against him, claiming to have seen him on the day of Sophie's death. The most significant testimony came from an anonymous witness who reported seeing Ian near Sophie's house at night and accused him of lying. Jules Thomas, speaking for the prosecution, described Ian as rude and unstable, suggesting that he might be capable of violence. Nevertheless, the Irish authorities maintained that they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. No conclusive evidence was found, and the DNA samples collected could not be fully analyzed, leaving officials constrained by the law. Sophie's family was deeply disappointed by the lack of progress in the investigation into her death. Relatives, including her husband, viewed the police's response as inadequate. In 2008, the family sought justice by appealing to the French court for an investigation but faced numerous obstacles. The key witness in the case later revealed that he had falsely accused journalist Ian out of fear of the police. After this revelation, Ian decided to take legal action against the Irish government for wrongful prosecution. His lawyer based their strategy on the witness's retraction of his statement. However, in 2019, a court in France began the trial without Ian's participation. Under French law, if a French citizen is killed abroad, the trial can take place in France. About 30 witnesses were summoned to testify. As a result of the proceedings, the court convicted Ian Kenneth Bailey of murder and sentenced him to 25 years in prison. However, the Irish Supreme Court refused to extradite him, arguing that the court's decision was flawed due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Consequently, Ian remained in Ireland, avoiding extradition and any legal consequences there. In 2022, a significant development occurred when the Irish and French judicial systems collaborated to investigate Sophie's murder. They reviewed all the case materials and re-examined the evidence, despite some being lost or damaged. There were suggestions that an accomplice of Daniel might have been involved, and Ian's account could have shed light on the truth. Unfortunately, Ian Kenneth Bailey passed away from cardiac arrest in January 2024 before he could learn the outcome of the investigation. The police searched his apartment, hoping to gather DNA samples for comparison with evidence collected during the original investigation in the 1990s. With advancements in DNA profiling and analysis, there was a renewed opportunity to uncover the truth about what happened. Nearly 30 years had passed since Sophie's death, and there was finally hope for answers. However, none had emerged yet. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Lowe. In the San Diego, California area, Michelle Lowe lived with her family, which included her parents, her brother Michael. The house was always full of life and laughter. Michelle's mother worked as a nurse and inspired her daughter to follow in her footsteps. After her mother died, Michelle decided to finish what her mother had started and see it through to the end. She became a source of support for her family, learning to drive, cooking, and always giving advice. Michelle is a nursing student at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland and is interning at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward. On May 27, 2011, after a long shift at the hospital, Michelle decided to quickly run to her car in the parking lot to get something. However, on her way to the car, she suddenly stopped, changed direction, and a few minutes later, a white Honda CR-V quickly drove out of the parking lot. When they began gathering all the students towards the end of her shift, Michelle was nowhere to be seen. Her personal belongings were left in the break room, her phone was not answering. This behavior was completely unlike her, and her instructor suspected something was wrong, so they immediately called the police. The next morning, 10 hours after Michelle's disappearance, there was still no news of her. Her brother and other relatives began searching for her, joining forces with the police and volunteers. Michelle's friends and colleagues came to the police station, clearly concerned about her disappearance. They insisted that her behavior had been too strange and that no one was willing to leave before a full investigation began. The officers quickly realized how serious the situation was. Traces of blood were found in the parking lot where her Honda had been parked. At about 9 a.m., they found her Honda CR-V itself. It was locked and neatly parked in a visitor spot near an apartment building just a kilometer from the hospital. Inside the car were her laptop and someone else's student ID from Sal Merritt University, which lay on the back seat. Michelle had no connection to the owner of the ID, and it remained unclear why it was there. Later, it was discovered that the card had been stolen a couple of days before Michelle's disappearance. Most likely, the attacker had stolen the ID to gain access to the building and possibly lured Michelle to the parking lot before disappearing with her in her own car. Detectives immediately understood that this was not the work of a random criminal, but someone who knew her schedule well. The theory that someone had simply attacked her randomly in the parking lot seemed unlikely. Hospital records showed that 30 minutes after Michelle walked into the parking lot, the emergency room received a call. At 7:30 p.m., the emergency department received a call. The caller introduced herself as Michelle and asked to speak to the teacher. The nurse who answered the call informed the caller that she would need to transfer the call to another department, but the caller insisted that the nurse not do so. She mentioned that she just wanted the teacher to know that Michelle had called to inform her that Michelle would not be able to come back that night because she had received a message that her father had had a heart attack. When Michelle's car was being towed away for further examination, her brother Michael unexpectedly received a message from her phone, "I'm fine." Then another message came, "I'm not missing. The phone is glitching and has erased all data." These messages drained the battery. Shortly afterward, friends began receiving strange messages, one after another, claiming that she had a flat tire, that she was back in Reno, that she needed a break from social media, and that she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. Michelle's ex-boyfriend noticed the activity on her phone and immediately wrote to her, but the reply was, "Who is this?" By May 31st, the reward for information on Michelle's whereabouts had increased to $20,000, and after a few days, it reached almost $100,000. The family hired a private detective, and more than 100 volunteers joined the search, dividing into 14 teams to cover an area of several kilometers. The reward continued to grow. During the investigation into Michelle's relationships, one interesting detail emerged. She had problems with an old friend named Giselle Daiwag Esteban. The girls had been close for many years and even went to college together. Giselle was dating a man named Scott, and they had a 6-year-old daughter. However, their relationship had ended on a bad note, which sparked the issues between Michelle and Giselle. Long before Giselle and Scott started dating, Michelle had gone on a couple of dates with Scott but quickly realized that they were better suited as friends. There was never any romance or intimacy between them. Despite this, Giselle became obsessively jealous. Her behavior grew increasingly strange, and her relationship with Michelle began to deteriorate. Michelle continued to be friends with Scott and refused to stop communicating with him just because Giselle wanted her to. She ignored Giselle's strange and obsessive claims. When detectives came to Giselle to ask her a few questions, she did not hide her obvious antipathy towards Michelle and didn't even try to pretend otherwise. Giselle asserting that she had long asked Michelle to stay away from her daughter and to stop communicating with their mutual friends. She described their relationship as torment, calling Michelle a best friend who cheated on her with her ex-fiancé. The detectives then found Scott, who honestly shared his version of events. They noticed that he was sincerely worried and even participated in the search for Michelle, attending meetings and vigils organized in her honor. Scott shared how Giselle behaved towards him and his family. At some point, when their relationship reached another crisis, he tried to improve his relationship with Giselle for the sake of their daughter. However, these attempts always ended in failure. He showed the detectives a long correspondence with Giselle, where she constantly mentioned Michelle and wrote increasingly aggressive messages, such as, "I hope you find that nasty." Giselle accused Michelle of destroying their family and threatened that she would soon become unnecessary. Giselle even sent messages directly to Michelle, insulting her and accusing her of ruining her family. Additionally, she followed Michelle to San Diego. Scott also showed the police a recording of one of Giselle's outbursts of rage. In the recording, she was sitting in a car with their daughter in the back seat. Giselle insisted that Scott be honest about Michelle and threatened to kill them both if he lied about his relationship with Michelle. She gave him what she called a last and final warning. Scott stated that Giselle was temporarily placed in a psychiatric clinic, where she was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. After that, Giselle continued to come to Scott's house, sometimes even going inside and just sitting in a room until she was noticed. Scott was able to achieve complete custody of their daughter, which further angered Giselle, prompting her to move back to Hayward to be closer to them. Just 3 days before Michelle went missing, Scott filed for a temporary restraining order against Giselle, claiming that she had threatened him and his family. On the same day, he accused Giselle of breaking into his home and into their daughter's room. The police continued to review CCTV footage in the hope of obtaining clear images of Michelle's car. Her brother did not believe that his sister could simply get lost, as she always stayed in touch with the family and even reminded them to call their grandmother on Mother's Day. A reward for any information about Michelle's whereabouts continued to grow, and the search remained active. The police still hoped to find Michelle alive, but the evidence they gathered indicated that their chances were diminishing with each passing day. Their worst fears were confirmed when traces of Michelle's blood were found in her car. They called her family and informed them that the case was no longer being treated as a disappearance. Nevertheless, Michelle's family, determined to continue searching for her and hoping for the best, refused to believe the worst until there was definitive proof. Giselle remained the only suspect in the case, and the police invited her for a full interrogation. By that time, she was already pregnant with her second child. During the conversation, she admitted that she was indeed at the hospital the night Michelle went missing, supposedly for a routine medical examination. When asked about their friendship, Giselle referred to Michelle as her sister but noted that their relationship had deteriorated due to a mistake made by Michelle and Scott. Giselle was released, but the police continued to monitor her, even installing a tracker on her car. Investigators believed she was connected to Michelle's disappearance, but they doubted whether she had acted alone due to her petite stature of only 158 centimeters. In the meantime, the police stepped up their investigation. They questioned Giselle's neighbors, who confirmed that Giselle and Michelle had been friends. Giselle told the press that she had nothing to do with Michelle's disappearance. Even her father joined the search for Michelle, flying in from Vietnam and calling on all local residents to help. An interesting turn of events occurred when Scott called the police and reported that he had found Michelle's phone in the back of his mother's car. Everything indicated that Giselle had planted it, since the tracker on her car showed that she had driven up to Scott's house several times. Security at the medical college where Michelle studied analyzed the data from the stolen student card, which had been used to access the building on May 26, the day before Michelle's disappearance. The cameras recorded Giselle. She had figured out the network technology and gained access to the card, stating that she was interested in enrolling. After receiving the card, Giselle began checking door locks, entering various classrooms, and inspecting the teacher's desk, where she found a student schedule, one of which belonged to Michelle. Now knowing the exact time when Michelle was supposed to be at college the next day, Giselle left the building. Analysis of phone data showed that on the day of her disappearance, Michelle and Giselle were in the same place at the same time. The next day, Giselle went into the Apple store and asked to unlock the iPhone, explaining to the technician that her daughter had accidentally locked her phone. After successfully unlocking it, Giselle left and went to Chuck E. Cheese, where cameras caught her texting. At the same time, Michelle's friends started receiving strange and obviously fake messages, which were confirmed by cell phone towers as coming from Michelle's phone. Despite there being no body, the police already had enough evidence to arrest Giselle Esteban for murder. When she was arrested at the front door of her home, a pair of shoes with Michelle's blood on the soles were also found in Giselle's car, along with a lock of Giselle's hair and her DNA on the steering wheel. Giselle had searched the internet for information on how to cause a heart attack without a trace, follow a person without being caught, and how to pick locks. She also searched for information on toxic gases such as potassium chloride and carbon monoxide. After Michelle went missing, her name was entered into the search bar more than 300 times. 10 days after Giselle's arrest, Michelle's remains were found in a shallow grave in a remote area, about 20 kilometers from Giselle's home. 3 months had passed, and the body was badly decomposed, so the exact cause of death could not be determined. The Alameda County coroner confirmed the identity of the remains in September 2011. Giselle Esteban appeared in court. She pleaded not guilty, claiming that the murder was an accident caused by a moment of anger and that Michelle allegedly provoked her. Her lawyer tried to prove that it was not a premeditated murder but one of chance. However, Giselle herself did not testify and appeared absolutely emotionless in court, without expressing a drop of remorse. Prosecutors assumed that Giselle had planned the attack in advance. She had tracked down Michelle, studied her schedule, waited for her to come out to the parking lot, and then attacked her with a sharp object. This explained the traces of blood, how she could load Michelle's body into the car and take it away. The prosecutor called Giselle a sociopath, noting her coldness and calculation. He emphasized that this was a carefully planned attack on a person who did not even suspect the danger. Giselle Esteban was found guilty of first-degree murder. She did not react to the verdict and left the courtroom in silence. At his sentencing hearing on December 10, Esteban was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the right to parole. Michelle's family was disappointed. They had hoped for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. With such a sentence, they would be forced to attend a parole hearing when she files the appropriate petition. Michelle's brother, Michael, was deeply distressed by the loss. He recalled how his sister had planned to follow in their late mother's footsteps and become a nurse to help people. For the family, the loss of Michelle was immense, and to this day, they hope that justice will prevail. Nothing can bring back their beloved sister and daughter. Michelle's dream of becoming a nurse and following in her mother's footsteps was cut short when Giselle killed her in the parking lot of a Bay Area hospital. It was a fit of jealousy when Giselle mistakenly thought that Michelle had started dating her boyfriend. Michelle's family plans to actively participate in the hearings to remind the judges how cruel this case is and to show how tragic their sister's fate is. The judge noted that in order to be released early, Giselle would have to show sincere remorse, which was not observed from her at the time of the trial. Shortly after her arrest, Giselle gave birth to a boy, who was handed over for adoption. There were rumors that Scott might have been the father, but he denied it, and the real father's name was never revealed. Lee's family continued to volunteer, helping other families dealing with missing loved ones and raising awareness of such cases. Michael said he was sure his sister was now in heaven with their mother, helping him come to terms with his loss and be less afraid of the future. Michelle's father has always been proud of her diligence and busy life but admits that he has never asked her to spend Father's Day with him. Now he regrets and dreams of turning back time, even just for one day, to invite her to enjoy this vacation together. After the trial, Michelle's family did not stop fighting for justice. They decided to direct their pain and anger toward creating an organization in her honor. The Michelle Le Foundation has become an important platform for helping families who have lost their loved ones and for those looking for missing relatives. They have organized annual events and fundraisers supporting search services, began advising other families, teaching them how to act correctly in the first hours after the disappearance of loved ones. Every year on Michelle's birthday, her friends, family, and those who were helped by the foundation gather together to remember her bright personality. It became not just a day of mourning but a celebration of her life, a day of support and love. People bring flowers and launch white balloons into the sky, symbolizing hope and memory. Scott, who was drawn into this terrible story, also took part in the work of the foundation. He decided to change his life and devote himself to raising his daughter. He actively participated in activities so that others would not face such a tragedy. As for Giselle, her chances for early release were minimal. Even after a while, her refusal to repent and emotional indifference made her a symbol of the destructive influence of hatred and envy. The story of how jealousy and unfounded suspicions can destroy lives became an important lesson for many, especially for those who suffer from toxic relationships and mistrust. Ultimately, despite all the tragedy, Michelle's light continued to illuminate the path for others. Her story and memory became a source of strength and inspiration, reminding everyone that love and compassion are stronger than hatred and jealousy. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jamie Stice. On April 12, 2011, in the small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, with a population of 2,500, 30-year-old Kathy Coy unexpectedly went into labor while driving. She had to give birth in her car on the side of the road, close to her home. Kathy had little time to call her friend, Shelley Lindsay, to inform her that she was about to give birth and needed help. When Shelley arrived, she was in the back seat of the car, covered in blood and holding her newborn. Sadly, the joy of becoming a mother was short-lived. Kathy noticed that the baby was having trouble breathing, so Shelley quickly called emergency services and drove them to the medical center. Kathy's hopes of motherhood were overshadowed by a grim situation. The doctors were very concerned. The baby's condition was critical. He was taken urgently to the intensive care unit due to breathing difficulties and a low body temperature, known as cold shock, which can be life-threatening. The doctors were not only worried about the newborn but also had concerns for Kathy and her family's emotional state during this crisis. The police arrived to investigate the situation. They went to the home where Kathy's children from a previous marriage lived with their grandmother. Officers spoke with the eldest daughter, 11-year-old Brianna, and her grandmother. The children expressed surprise at their mother's new baby, as they did not believe she was pregnant. They mentioned that she intended to meet with a friend who was also pregnant, but no one knew the friend's name. The situation seemed suspicious. Detectives accessed Kathy's social media account and identified a friend of hers, 21-year-old Jamie Stice, who was pregnant. The police attempted to reach Jamie but were unable to make contact. The detectives subsequently reached out to Jamie's mother, Jeannie. She informed them that her daughter was in the final stages of pregnancy and that she hadn't heard from Jamie since 9:30 that morning. Concerned, she was contemplating reporting her daughter as missing but realized that the police might not act quickly since not enough time had passed. While the investigation was ongoing, detectives spoke with Kathy again to clarify the timeline of the incident from that day. Kathy confirmed that she had given birth. She explained that she had woken up early, saw her husband Shannon off to work around 4:30 a.m., and then left to meet her friend Jamie around 10 a.m. After their meeting, as she was returning home, she began to feel contractions. Kathy stopped at a restaurant to grab a quick bite but felt the need to leave in a hurry. Realizing she wouldn't reach the hospital in time, she called her closest friend for assistance. Shelley, Kathy's friend, recounted that when she received the call for help, she rushed outside and saw Kathy in the back seat of a car. Kathy was not wearing pants, only a bloody shirt, and she held a baby in her arms, who was also covered in blood, as if he had just been born. Shelley noticed the placenta and recognized that her friend needed urgent help, especially since the baby was struggling to breathe. She quickly got into her car and drove to the medical center. Shelley observed that the baby was covered in grass and dirt but assumed he had fallen and gotten dirty in the car. There was no time to learn more. Her priority was supporting the newborn. Both women's accounts were largely similar, with one key difference. Kathy claimed that Shelley delivered the baby, while Shelley denied this. The situation was chaotic, with Kathy in labor crying out, and both her and the baby's conditions creating confusion. While doctors worked to assist the baby, Kathy pleaded with them to save his life. There were concerns about whether the situation was staged, leading to the decision to take Kathy in for questioning at the station. At that time, Kathy had already been examined by doctors, and her condition seemed stable. However, when the police began questioning her about her friend Jamie on social media, her story started to change. Initially, she claimed that she had only briefly met Jamie before ending their friendship. Kathy explained that she had driven Jamie to the Social Security office, dropped her off near the building, and then Jamie had left in an unknown direction. At that point, Kathy began to experience contractions, which forced her to leave abruptly. This part of her story raised doubts. To support her new version, Kathy presented a message from Jamie, which allegedly asked her to pick Jamie up from the Social Security office, a request Kathy refused due to complications in their story. However, when detectives expressed their disbelief, Kathy's narrative shifted again. Now, Kathy stated that she had picked up Jamie and taken her home, but Jamie was so exhausted that she collapsed on the sofa. Kathy claimed her contractions only started after this encounter. The significant changes in her story seemed implausible, but she attributed them to the stress of the emergency situation. Detectives aimed to determine the truth about how Kathy and Jamie met. Jamie's mother, Jeannie, stated that they had known each other for only a couple of months after connecting through social media. Jamie is pregnant with a baby. When asked about Kathy's relationship with Jamie, Kathy claimed she had known Jamie for only a few weeks and had been introduced through a mutual friend while seeking help with housing issues. At this point, inconsistencies regarding their acquaintance and its purpose emerged. Kathy couldn't even name this mutual friend, even though Jamie was 20 weeks pregnant, aligning with her due date, which raised further suspicion. Kathy was later informed that something significant might have occurred around 10:30 a.m., right after their meeting. Jamie was missing, and detectives informed the parents that they could not reach out to her. They encouraged Kathy to assist in the search. At this point, they were already skeptical about whether the baby truly belonged to Kathy. Kathy's husband, Shannon, arrived at the station. He was thrilled that his wife had finally given birth, but was confused about why she was being held and questioned. Shannon informed the police that Kathy had experienced miscarriages in the past, which had led her to struggle with depression. Despite the challenges, she remained hopeful about becoming pregnant again and starting a family. He feared that if their efforts failed, their relationship might end. For a woman desperate to become a mother, the thought of losing her husband could push her to desperate actions, even to the point of harming another woman. It was possible that Kathy had pretended to be pregnant to keep her husband with her. Additionally, her friend Shelley, who took her to the hospital during labor, might have played a role in this situation. Kathy frequently visited Shelley and shared stories about her pregnancy, but it was unclear whether Shelley supported Kathy's deception, suspected her, or had unwittingly assisted in a crime. Shelley told the detectives that she had never faced such accusations before. However, during the investigation, it became clear that she was involved in several aspects of the deception. For instance, after Kathy returned from a gynecologist appointment where she learned she was not pregnant, Shelley pretended to be a nurse. Kathy feared that this news could push her husband to leave her, so she asked Shelley to call him, posing as a nurse who confirmed her pregnancy. Shelley claimed she had no idea that Kathy was pretending to be pregnant or plotting anything deceitful. She believed everything was genuine and was genuinely happy for her friend. Kathy managed to convince Shelley, using various excuses, that pregnancy came with complications and that Shelley's support could help save her marriage. Up until the end, Shelley truly believed that Kathy would soon give birth. However, not everyone shares the same perspective as Shelley. When the police spoke to Kathy's other friends and her husband's relatives, it became clear that there had been a lot of discussion about Kathy's situation over the past 6 months. Many people suspected that she had been deceitful. For example, her mother-in-law often tried to reach out to her, hoping to find out the truth. She believes that Kathy is merely trying to deceive everyone, especially Shannon, to bind him to herself. The mother-in-law was very frustrated with Kathy's behavior and discussed it with her son, Shannon. For a short time, he listened to her concerns. A lot of suspicion arose from the continuous delays in the expected due date. The situation dragged on for so long that it started to seem unrealistic, as Kathy herself had no clear idea of when she would give birth. Witnesses noted that over the past few months, her belly has sometimes appeared smaller and then larger. By late 2011, the mother-in-law was convinced that Kathy was lying and was simply afraid of losing Shannon. She managed to persuade her son by highlighting that his wife was clearly deceiving him. He began to demand proof of the pregnancy, which led to even more elaborate deceptions. To maintain the ruse, Kathy stole an ultrasound photo during a visit. This image helped convince her husband, but it was not the only tactic she used. After stealing the ultrasound photo, Shannon is overjoyed about his wife's pregnancy. However, if the truth were revealed, their relationship would be over. His mother insisted that her son had been deceived. In the face of growing doubts, Shannon demanded more proof. His wife was well prepared and even managed to show him a video of their baby's heartbeat, which she had downloaded from the internet. Shannon was repeatedly misled. His mother was disappointed but unaware of the depths of the deception. She simply didn't know Kathy well enough. As the due date approached, Kathy needed more than just a friend acting as a nurse, a video, and a stolen ultrasound photo. After Jamie's disappearance, the photo was used to convince the police and medical staff that Kathy had given birth to the boy. As they contemplated the situation, a troubling image formed in their minds of how Kathy could have acquired the baby and why his mother, Jamie, was missing. Meanwhile, Kathy was already in an interrogation room at the local police station. Despite being stubborn and refusing to admit anything, she continued to provide confused and conflicting testimony, changing her story with each new detail the police revealed. There was no longer any doubt about her dishonesty, but they needed a confession. It was time to employ some tactics. They decided to leave her in the interrogation room alone for a while. This clever move aimed to see how she would respond and what attempts she would make to extricate herself from the situation. The plan worked, but not in the way they had anticipated. Kathy suddenly grabbed her mobile phone and called an unfamiliar number, pretending to talk to Jamie. When the detectives returned, she mentioned it, but she still couldn't provide any information about Jamie. A check on the phone number revealed that she hadn't actually called Jamie at all. The detectives quickly confirmed that there was no doubt that the boy Kathy had brought to the hospital was Jamie's child. DNA testing confirmed this connection. Although the detectives continued to act confidently, Kathy began to waver in her story. Unfortunately, she still refused to acknowledge what had happened to Jamie. The police informed Kathy that witnesses had seen Jamie get into her car alone that morning, and no one saw her come back, contradicting Kathy's claims. They tried to determine where Kathy had taken Jamie. Why was she holding the baby? Doctors noted that the baby's breathing issues and hypothermia were not accidental. He had been born less than an hour before arriving at the medical center, and his airways were still filled with fluid. Kathy seemed overwhelmed and unsure of how to help him, which caused the baby's condition to worsen. Once these facts were revealed, Kathy presented a new version of her story. Kathy revealed that about 9 months before the current incident, she had visited the hospital and learned from the doctor that she had suffered another miscarriage. After leaving the clinic, she encountered a woman named Ashley, who suggested that she could buy a child for $550 that was expected to be born to Jamie, but insisted they would need to wait until the boy was born. Kathy agreed right away and paid, hoping this would help save her marriage. Afterward, she pretended to be pregnant to maintain the deception while waiting for the birth. On the day of the incident, Kathy claimed she took the child from Jamie and left, asserting that she did not harm him. Kathy's account sounded unbelievable. How could Ashley plan such a transaction, and how did she know 9 months in advance that Jamie would have a baby, especially a boy? Furthermore, Kathy could not provide any contact information or even a description of Ashley, making it clear that she was lying. The detectives quickly noticed her inconsistencies. Eventually, she admitted that the story about purchasing a baby was untrue, but she continued to claim that she took the baby from Jamie's home early in the morning, insisting that Jamie simply vanished after handing over the baby. Kathy did not explain how she ended up with a stranger's child in her arms, although it was evident that the child was Jamie's son. Investigators were quickly able to uncover Kathy's identity and found unsettling details about her. Her stepfather, Imran, reported witnessing her shocking behavior on several occasions. He described her as cruel, manipulative, and unpredictable, believing she was capable of committing terrible acts for her own enjoyment and benefit. Imran mentioned that Kathy had once confessed to him her potential to commit murder. Therefore, he was not surprised to see her in police custody, convinced that she could commit any crime and was indifferent to the pain she caused others. It became clear that Kathy was already known to law enforcement. Detectives found a police report accusing her of stalking a pregnant teacher with whom she worked. Their interactions at school were frequent, and Kathy's behavior had become so troubling that it frightened the teacher, who detailed several disturbing incidents. One particularly alarming moment occurred when the teacher was alone in her office and noticed Kathy silently watching her from the aisle. Remarkably, during the time the teacher was pregnant, Kathy also claimed that she was expecting a baby. Later, the teacher experienced a miscarriage, and shortly after that, Kathy's alleged pregnancy also ended. If these events had unfolded differently, that teacher might have become a victim instead of Jamie. The detectives were determined to extract a confession from Kathy. They were not going to let her leave but needed solid evidence first. There were crucial details that Kathy was not aware of. Despite her persistence, the investigators believed that Jamie was no longer alive. When Kathy and her friend Shelley arrived at the hospital with the child, the placenta was discovered. This raised serious concerns about the childbirth. Normally, placentas remain inside the mother after delivery, leading to suspicions that Kathy had attempted an untrained surgical procedure, similar to a cesarean section. The police interviewed doctors and hospital staff. Experts indicated that if a mother's heart stops, there is typically a window of no more than 5 minutes to save the baby. Kathy was likely aware of this urgency, which may have caused her to act carelessly and make several mistakes that could have endangered her child's life. Detectives believed that Jamie had bled out and died shortly after the brutal procedure began. During the questioning, Kathy began to show signs of distress but did not admit to murder. She continued to weave stories under the detectives' pressure, avoiding direct questions, and suggested that she needed to be placed in a psychiatric unit, implying she was mentally unstable. In response, the police shifted their approach. Instead of pressuring her further, they tried to soothe her, suggesting that her actions might have been accidental. Their goal was to gather any information they could. Kathy was the last person to see Jamie alive, so all suspicion fell on her. The police continued their investigation due to concerns that she might evade capture. The police questioned those closest to Kathy, but no one could confirm her story. However, detectives eventually gathered important information revealing Kathy's true nature. Her own children shared troubling insights about her. Just 2 weeks before Kathy showed up at the hospital with a baby, she had visited a flea market with her kids and purchased a powerful stun gun. The seller warned that this model could incapacitate an adult with direct contact. While testing it, Kathy approached a large stranger at the market and waved the stun gun in front of him. When he remained unfazed, she pressed it against his leg, causing him to collapse. Pleased with her actions, Kathy laughed and walked away. Under pressure from detectives, Kathy began to disclose unsettling details of her plan. She initially wanted to simulate giving birth as realistically as possible, even considering placing the fetus and placenta inside herself. When this proved too complicated, she devised an alternative. Arriving at a friend's house, she sat in the back seat, holding the baby while using cut-out female organs to create the illusion of having just given birth. Regardless, she still refused to reveal Jamie's whereabouts. Her family members confirmed her violent tendencies. In fact, Kathy's own mother was so afraid of her that she took Kathy's children from her first marriage and raised them herself. Shannon's relatives were horrified by Kathy's erratic behavior and urged him to end their relationship. After receiving partial recognition of her situation, Kathy began to elaborate on her belief that she had multiple personalities. She insisted that it was not her, but an alter ego named Lindsay, who approached her friend with the baby. This persona was used to shift the blame for everything that happened to Jamie, although Kathy avoided providing specific details. She frequently mentioned that she belonged in a mental hospital instead of prison. Kathy claimed that when her personality switched, she experienced blackouts and couldn't remember anything. She described instances where she could get into a car, lose touch with reality, and wake up in a completely different part of the city without knowing how she got there. Detectives, however, suspected that Kathy was lying. They discovered that she had previously discussed plans to kidnap another child with her relatives and had even sought her children's assistance. When they refused, she dismissed it as a joke. Kathy's mother recounted how her daughter had repeatedly urged her to help commit murder, but she flatly refused. People who knew Kathy well denied her claims of having a split personality, stating that she had never exhibited such issues before. During the interrogation, Kathy's second personality appeared very self-assured, insisting that no charges could stick to her. Kathy continued to assert that Jamie was alive, despite the severity of Jamie's injuries, which made survival impossible. This bravado quickly faded when Kathy learned she was being accused of murder. After her arrest, Kathy finally agreed to cooperate with the authorities, even leading them to the location of Jamie's body. It was then that the true extent of the crime emerged. Kathy's friendship with Jamie was greatly exaggerated. In reality, Jamie had been another victim of Kathy, who had been stalking her. Kathy had lured Jamie into meetings with gifts and promises of a job. She brought the police to a wooded area where Jamie's body was found, badly mutilated and lifeless, with signs of being shocked by a stun gun on her neck. This was the same stun gun that Kathy had purchased at a flea market with her children just 2 weeks prior to the crime. When Jamie's body was discovered, it was revealed that she had died from multiple stab wounds and excessive blood loss. Kathy had immobilized her with an electric shock gun and then performed a cesarean section in the forest. This is why the baby was found covered in grass and dirt when Kathy brought him to her friend's house. Kathy admitted that she hadn't researched adequately to prepare for such a dangerous procedure. She only looked online once and thought that was sufficient, which was clearly inadequate for someone without any medical training. Kathy, who was 40 years old, was charged with first-degree murder, as well as kidnapping both an adult and a baby. In court, she cried and pleaded guilty to the charges of kidnapping and murder. The baby she had taken from Jamie survived and was later named Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, honoring his late mother with his second surname. He was placed with his father. Kathy sent letters to her children explaining what had happened, but those letters contained many lies. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her children were placed in a foster home, and her husband remarried, finding a stable partner. In interviews, Kathy's children stated that on the day of the crime, their mother appeared completely normal and was not anxious about the act she was committing. During the trial, Kathy's stepfather expressed his sorrow, not primarily for his relationship with Kathy, but because he was relieved that she could no longer harm anyone. He also felt deep remorse over Jamie's death, regretting that he hadn't reported Kathy to the police after she confessed her intention to kill, believing that doing so might have saved Jamie's life. The case of Jamie Stice is a chilling story of despair, deceit, and unspeakable acts of brutality. Set in the peaceful small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, this tragedy reveals the dark side of the desire to become a mother, leading Kathy Coy down an unforgivable path of crime. Jamie Stice, a young pregnant woman filled with hopes for the future, became a victim of manipulation and horrifying violence, leaving her son, Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, motherless from the moment he was born. Kathy was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and must pay for her sins. However, the pain she inflicted on Jamie's family and her own is irreparable. This case serves not only as a warning about the destructive power of deceit but also raises questions about the boundary between love and obsession. Crime lovers, what do you think about this haunting ending? Leave your thoughts.